Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. This is one of the most personal and unsettling experiences I've ever had with the paranormal. It happened about a year ago, when I was living in a small town near the Appalachian Mountains. Back then, I was very close with my friend Sarah, who shared my fascination with all things creepy. We would stay up late during sleepovers, watching horror movies, diving into real paranormal videos online, and reading chilling first-hand accounts of supernatural encounters. One evening, Sarah had an idea that made me uncomfortable at first. She brought out 6 large candles and suggested we try summoning something, just to see if it was real. I hesitated, but her excitement wore me down. We arranged the candles in the shape of a star and sat around them, holding hands. I didn't expect much, and sure enough, nothing happened. A little disappointed, I went home that night, trying to push the whole thing from my mind. Weeks passed, and both of us moved on, losing interest in the paranormal. But about 3 months later, my life took a darker turn. I fell into a deep depression, cutting myself off from friends and family. Strangely enough, Sarah seemed to be going through something similar, and we became even closer. Looking back, this was a warning sign I ignored. One night, I was startled awake by a loud growl. At first, I thought it was our dog, so I got up to check on him. But he was sound asleep in his bed. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was nothing, and went back to bed. A few nights later, something far stranger happened. I woke up to see a little girl standing at the foot of my bed. She didn't look like something out of a horror movie. No pale skin, no creepy features, no long disheveled hair. She was wearing modern clothes, maybe jeans and a t-shirt, and had wavy, blonde hair. I sat up and stared at her for what felt like forever before she simply vanished. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared. Instead, I felt a strange sense of excitement, as though she needed my help. Maybe this was my special connection to something greater. For a while, the girl kept appearing to me every night, and I didn't tell anyone. I thought of her as my secret. But then, one night, everything changed. I woke up to the feeling of a hand clamping over my mouth. It wasn't cold, like I'd expected. It was hot, almost burning. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a friendly spirit reaching out for help. Whatever this was, it wasn't kind. The next day, I told my parents. My mom, who was a believer in spiritual protection, blessed my room, and things seemed to settle down for a while. My depression lifted, and I started feeling like myself again. But then I went to Sarah's house for a sleepover, and everything went downhill again. We were sitting on her couch, watching The Lion King, when we heard a door slam shut. Assuming it was her older brother, she yelled at him to be quieter, but he didn't respond. We shrugged it off until a loud crash came from her room. We rushed in and found a photo of the two of us smashed against the wall, on the opposite side of the room from where it had been. We searched for her brother, convinced it was a prank, but he wasn't even home. Sarah was thrilled, treating it like some exciting mystery, but I wasn't. I was starting to realize that whatever this was, it had followed me. That night was terrifying. Our blankets were yanked off, and we heard persistent banging from the walls. While I was frozen with fear, Sarah was laughing, as if she enjoyed it. I couldn't wait to go home, but as soon as I stepped into my room, I knew something was wrong. The air was heavy, and the room was freezing, strange for a hot summer night in Kentucky. I tried to ignore it, but the sense of a dark presence only grew stronger each day. Soon, even my dad noticed something was off. Worse still, I became angrier and more withdrawn. My parents said I spent most of my time just sitting in my room, doing nothing. During those nights, I'd wake up to whispers so faint I couldn't understand them. Then, one evening, I saw a shadow glide across the wall before a heavy weight pinned me down in bed. I knew I couldn't handle this alone anymore. Desperate, I begged my mom to call someone for help. She contacted my uncle, a pastor from the small church we attended, and he agreed to come bless the house. The night before he arrived was the most terrifying yet. My glasses disappeared, even though no one had touched them. Later, as I lay in bed, I felt the same crushing weight I'd felt before, pinning me down. When my uncle finally came and blessed the house, I felt an immediate sense of relief. It was like a heavy burden had been lifted. As we walked through the house to ensure the presence was gone, we found my missing glasses sitting in the bathtub, which had been used after they disappeared. That was the moment we knew it was over. I still live in the same house. Occasionally, small things happen, no matter where I am, but I've learned to live with it. It's just part of my life now. It was Halloween night in 2008, and while this isn't my personal experience, it's a tale that my brother, sister, and their close friends have often shared. It's a bit long, but stick with me. When I was growing up, we lived in a small town in the Midwest, a place known for its old buildings and eerie history. We weren't exactly surrounded by the paranormal, but my sister and her 3 best friends, who were all into witchcraft and the occult, loved exploring the spiritual world. They were all Wiccans, and their fascination with spirits led them to frequent the local cemetery during the day, trying to make contact with whatever might be lingering there. Most of the time, the results were subtle: a chill in the air or the faint sound of footsteps on the gravel paths. But Halloween 2008 was different. That night, they decided to visit the cemetery at midnight, and my brother and his friend decided to join them. This made a group of 6, ranging in age from 13 to 19. I was 14 at the time, and for reasons I still regret, I decided to stay home. I didn't think much would happen, but to this day, I envy their experience. The cemetery they chose was part of an old church that had been built back in the 1800s, a historic structure that had seen its fair share of tragedy over the years. It was one of those places that locals whispered about, especially around Halloween. The cemetery was notorious for being one of the more haunted spots in town. As the group made their way through the cemetery's iron gates, the night air felt colder than it should have been. They weren't expecting anything extraordinary, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. They set up a small circle, holding hands with a single candle in the middle, its flickering flame casting long shadows over the weathered tombstones. My sister read a prayer aloud, her voice steady as the wind picked up around them. After the reading, they sat in silence, each of them scanning the darkened cemetery, their eyes shifting nervously over the cracked stones and twisted trees. It wasn't long before one of my sister's friends saw it. At first, it was a faint glow, soft and gray, flickering like a candle caught in the wind. The light was about 20 feet away, near an old oak tree on the edge of the cemetery. The others whispered, uncertain, watching as the figure slowly came into focus. As they moved closer, it became clear. It was the ghost of a young girl, dressed in clothing from the late 1800s, her dress delicate and elaborate, her hair styled in soft waves. She twirled, moving in a slow, graceful dance, her figure almost glowing in the moonlight. The group stood frozen, entranced by the sight. The ghost wasn't threatening at all, almost serene, like she was lost in her own world. My sister later described it as a beautiful moment, like a scene out of a dream. My brother and his friend, who had been hesitant to approach, stepped forward at the other's urging. But then, something changed. Next to the girl's apparition stood a massive oak tree. As they got closer, the ground around the tree began to stir, dirt flying into the air as though something beneath it was alive. A low, guttural growl echoed from the earth, unsettling and animalistic. From the shadows beneath the tree, another form began to emerge, this one far darker and more menacing. The creature was humanoid, but its movements were unnatural, jerky, as if it wasn't fully materialized. It was crouched low to the ground, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The girl's ghost faded instantly, leaving only the sinister figure. The group froze, their hearts racing as the creature's frantic digging stopped. The air felt thick, the hairs on their necks standing on end. They watched as the creature turned toward them, its movements jerky, twisted. Without warning, it lunged. A high-pitched screech tore through the night as the creature moved in short, rapid bursts, vanishing and reappearing closer each time. Panic set in. The group bolted, running as fast as they could through the cemetery, their legs pumping furiously. My brother glanced back and saw the creature still in pursuit, its form flickering with each stride. But in the same spot where the girl had danced, her ghost appeared once more, watching them run with an expression that was impossible to read. When they finally made it back home, they were breathless, their faces pale, and they told us everything. At first, I didn't believe them, chalking it up to an overactive imagination or adrenaline-fueled hysteria. But when I saw my brother's face, drained of all color, his voice trembling as he recounted the events, I knew they weren't making it up. It was clear that whatever they had encountered, it had shaken them to the core. They were both terrified and exhilarated by the experience, and I couldn't help but wonder, had the girl's ghost been leading them toward that thing? And if so, why? A year later, they returned to the cemetery, and this time, I decided to join them. Unfortunately, nothing quite as terrifying happened. After the seance, I wandered off on my own for a few minutes. I felt uneasy, though I couldn't pinpoint why. It was as if something was watching me from the shadows. And then, out of nowhere, I saw something white drift above me, like a ghostly figure, just for a split second, before it vanished into the night. It left me unsettled, but I tried to brush it off. Later, I noticed a faint greenish glow coming from the spot where my sister had seen the girl's ghost the year before. It looked like a tiny flickering light, something you'd expect to see from a distant flame. I called the others over, but as we moved closer, the light disappeared, replaced by a weathered gravestone. We all felt a bit foolish but lingered a while longer, hoping for something more. But nothing else happened. The only sound came from the church, where we could hear the faint scraping of something heavy being moved, but it was hard to pinpoint where it was coming from. On the walk back, everyone complained about how uneventful the night had turned out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Gravestones don't flicker or glow. I still believe what I saw that night was a ghost. Since then, I've gone back to the cemetery a few times, hoping to catch something on camera. Out of 58 pictures, only one shows something strange, something I believe is a ghost. It's an experience I'll never forget, but that's a story for another time. This happened about 2 or 3 years ago when I was 12 or 13. I'm 15 now. I live in a small town in Oregon, and at the time, I was going through a tough period. My mom had recently moved in with her boyfriend, and she'd only been there for about a month. I was still adjusting, and things felt off in ways I couldn't explain. One day, my dog started acting strange. She wouldn't leave my side, no matter what I did. I was home alone all day, so I spent a lot of time either in my room on the computer or downstairs in the living room. Wherever I went, she followed me, sticking close and constantly looking up at me like she was checking to see if I was okay. But I was fine. At least I thought I was. She wasn't hungry, and she didn't need to go outside. When I tried to put her out, she refused to go. It was so unlike her. She even had what seemed like an anxiety attack, nearly jumping through the window to get back inside. I didn't know what was happening, but it felt wrong. I let her back in and sat on the couch, trying to relax. She hopped up beside me, but her behavior only got stranger. It was a cold and rainy afternoon, and at first, I didn't think much of the weather. But then my dog started growling. A low, deep growl that made my skin crawl. Her eyes glazed over, and she stared up at the ceiling, then around the room, and then, right at the empty space beside me. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt an unease I couldn't shake. I tried calling her to snap her out of it, but she didn't respond. Instead, she jumped onto my lap and sat there, which only made me more nervous. I was so freaked out that I pushed her off and ran outside, hoping the fresh air would calm me. As I stood there in the rain, I heard my dog bark a few loud, aggressive barks. Then everything went dead silent. After a moment, I turned back toward the house. She was sitting calmly at the door, wagging her tail like nothing had happened. I didn't want to go back inside, but I forced myself to. She seemed like her old self again, but still, she wouldn't leave my side. The rest of the day passed without incident, but things took a turn later that night. It was about 1:30 or 2 a.m. I had been chatting with friends online and decided to shut down my computer and go to bed. My dog curled up beside me, quickly falling asleep. I wasn't tired, so I played some games on my phone for a while. Around 3 a.m., still unable to sleep, I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes, hoping I'd eventually drift off. That's when my dog got up. She moved to the edge of the bed and started staring into one of the corners of my room. I tried to ignore it and called her back, but instead of coming to me, she barked and ran to the corner, staring up at the wall about halfway up. Panic began to set in. I started crying, covering my ears, trying to block out the growing sense of dread. My dog eventually came back to the bed and sat beside me, but I could still feel something, an overwhelming presence right next to me. Then, I felt it, a solid pat on my head. It wasn't too hard or too soft, just a gentle pat, like someone giving a dog a pat for a job well done. My heart raced. My dog began barking uncontrollably, so much that she started snorting. I called out for my mom, and she came running into the room. She sat beside me, holding me and calming me down until I finally fell asleep. The next day, my mom pulled me aside for a talk. She said, "I think I might know what patted you on the head, honey. I think it might have been my dad." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. It had only been a few days before her dad's birthday, and she told me she'd been feeling a presence around her a lot lately, especially when she was with her new partner. She even mentioned seeing something in the kitchen once but had brushed it off at the time. I once met a fascinating man during one of my travels, someone whose story stuck with me long after we parted ways. I enjoy meeting people with unique tales to tell, especially those who have lived through things that sound like they belong in a different world. We decided to take a trip to a small town in upstate New York, near the edge of the Adirondacks, and checked into an old, charming hotel with creaky floors and that unmistakable scent of history in the air. It was the kind of place that felt both welcoming and eerie at the same time, as if the walls held secrets they weren't ready to share. We stayed up late that night, talking about strange experiences we'd had in life. His story was unlike any I had heard before. He told me he had grown up in a small village in Sri Lanka and was known for his unusual abilities. He could supposedly speak with the deceased, heal people with just a touch, and remove negative spirits from the living. His tales were so vivid, I found myself questioning whether he was exaggerating, but there was something in the way he spoke that made me believe him, even if I couldn't explain why. When I asked him how he could do all of this, he told me that angels whispered to him, guiding him and offering him their knowledge. He was cautious, though, and didn't share too much. "The angels don't like it when I talk too much about them," he said, his voice lowering. "They get upset. Don't repeat this to anyone." His serious tone made me wonder, was there some truth to what he was saying? Curious and a little skeptical, I asked if he could help me, maybe perform some sort of cleansing or even check if there was bad energy around me. He hesitated before admitting that since moving to the U.S., he had fallen into the habit of drinking. "It dulls my connection with them," he explained. "The angels don't reach out to me like they used to." I pressed him further, asking him to try something, anything, and after a long pause he agreed. Sitting beside me on the bed, he waved his hands around me gently, murmuring something in a language I didn't recognize, maybe Arabic. He didn't tell me what he was saying, but the words flowed like a chant, rhythmic and soothing. When he was done, he told me to look at my reflection in the mirror. Something inside me twisted at the idea. I couldn't bring myself to look. I felt an odd unease, as if there was something staring back at me that I wasn't ready to face. That night, I had a dream I hadn't had since I was a child. I was standing on a narrow cliff, the crashing waves below threatening to pull me in. The wind howled, but I held onto the jagged rocks, determined not to let go. It was a dream I remembered clearly, one that used to visit me when I was younger. But why had it returned now, after so many years? Later, I woke up in a cold sweat, my skin burning as if I was on fire from the inside out. The heat was unbearable, and I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. It wasn't like anything I'd experienced before. I rushed to wake him, pleading with him to turn on the lights and air conditioning. But when he opened his eyes, he said he wasn't hot at all, as if he hadn't felt a thing. When I told him what had happened, he only smiled. "I told you," he said, "the angels, they're here with me. You're just not used to feeling their presence. That's why you're scared." But I couldn't shake the fear. If it was angels, why did their presence feel so oppressive, so unsettling? When I told him about the dream, his expression changed. He sat up straight, his eyes widening. "That's incredible," he said in awe. "The fire spirit must have been testing you in your dream. That's why you woke up burning. It touched you while you slept." I didn't know what to think. A fire spirit. What did that even mean? After that night, things only got stranger. I began waking up early every morning, always with that same lingering sensation of being watched, my skin still hot to the touch. The fear didn't go away, it only grew stronger. After our trip, he came to visit me at my apartment. I told my best friend about him, curious if she'd be just as intrigued. She was, and after some convincing, he offered to do a reading for her. But during the session, something bizarre happened. He made a strange noise, and we both burst out laughing. He seemed embarrassed and quickly gave up. After that, we lost touch with him, and I never heard from him again. But when he left, something changed in my home. Up until that point, I had always felt safe there, but suddenly, it felt different. For the first time in 2 years, I couldn't sleep in my own room. Every morning, I woke up at exactly 3 a.m., my heart pounding in my chest, as if something was watching me from the shadows. It was so overwhelming that I moved to the couch in the living room for nearly 3 months. It wasn't just me. 2 of my friends visited during that time, and they both mentioned feeling uneasy near my room. One of them even admitted she was too scared to walk past it at night. Eventually, I reached out to him, wondering if he had somehow caused this. He assured me there was nothing to fear, that I had simply become more sensitive to the spiritual world after spending time with him. "It's just your angels," he said. "They're watching over you." But if they were angels, why did it feel so terrifying? I'm not sure if it was the chanting he did, the laughter during my friend's reading, or something else entirely. All I know is that it took months for me to feel comfortable in my own room again. After some research, I came across a theory about waking up at 3 a.m. Some people say it's a sign of guardian angels nearby, but others claim it's when spirits, or even demons, are most active. I even read somewhere that it could be a jinn, a mischievous and often malevolent spirit. The descriptions fit. Bad dreams, the feeling of burning, being watched. It all lined up. Could a jinn be involved in all of this? My name is Courtney, and I'm 15 years old. I've always been interested in ghosts and the supernatural, but I never had a real encounter, at least, not until last Christmas, when my family visited my aunt's house in a small town near the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. That trip changed everything for me. Before we arrived, we had just returned from an unforgettable trip to Los Angeles. I was still on a high from it. Los Angeles really is the coolest place. But my excitement faded quickly when we arrived at my aunt's house. I'd heard plenty of spooky stories about that place, and I'd hoped I wouldn't experience anything myself. The house is one of a kind. It was once a church, but it was torn down and rebuilt using the old stones and bricks. It's a big, 2-story home, perched at the top of a hill, surrounded by dense woods. My aunt, uncle, cousin, and their cat, Emily, lived there. Well, they used to have Emily. Just a week before our visit, Emily had been hit by a car, and they buried her near the front yard. On the morning of October 9, 2011, something strange happened. It was 4:30 a.m., still pitch black outside, and I woke up with an unsettling feeling. The room was cold, but I brushed it off. Colorado mornings can be chilly. I lay there, trying to shake off the discomfort, but something just felt wrong. I couldn't fall back asleep. After about 10 minutes, I heard a sound. At first, it was faint, but as I focused, I realized it was the soft jingling of a bell. My heart sank. I knew Emily was gone, so how could I be hearing her bell? I tried to rationalize it, but then the sound stopped abruptly, leaving the room eerily silent. Just as I began to relax, I heard something else. Footsteps. They were soft and light, almost like a child's footsteps. My body froze. I was sleeping in the office, and my door faced the staircase directly. I couldn't move. My mind raced with questions. Who, or what, was walking up those stairs? Would they come into my room? Was I about to see something I didn't want to see? The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. I held my breath, straining to hear what would happen next. Then they started again, but this time they were heavier, as if an adult was walking. The steps moved down the hallway, toward the living room where my mom was sleeping. My fear peaked. I wanted to get up and stop whatever was causing this, but I couldn't move. All I could do was listen as the footsteps reached the end of the hallway and stopped. Then, silence. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing happened. The cold feeling in the room vanished, and I felt like I could breathe again. After what felt like forever, I gathered the courage to get up. I turned on all the lights upstairs and checked every room. Everyone was sound asleep. Finally, I went to my mom, waking her up and explaining everything. I asked if she'd heard anything, but she hadn't. I begged her to stay awake with me, but she was too tired to stay up. I went back to bed, pulling the covers up to my ears. I didn't sleep until the first light of morning peeked through the windows. When I woke up later, I felt safer in the sunlight, but the memory of the night still lingered. I went downstairs and hesitantly entered the kitchen, where my mom was retelling what I'd told her. My aunt was listening closely, and when I asked if anything like that had happened before, she nodded. She explained that the sounds I heard were familiar to them. Emily's bell sometimes jingled, the light footsteps belonged to a little boy, and the heavier ones came from a young man, no older than 20. My aunt added that these things didn't just happen at night, they occurred during the day too. She told me about light bulbs shattering on their own and other odd occurrences. What struck me most was how calm they were about it, like it was just another part of their life. My mom mentioned that before she fell asleep that night, she had been watching a documentary about a haunted mansion in California called the Greystone Mansion, which we visited during our trip to Los Angeles. I couldn't help but wonder if that had anything to do with what I'd experienced. Now, here's where I'm stuck. My mom wants to visit my aunt's house again, but I'm terrified. Just thinking about going back makes my heart race. I don't know how I'll face the possibility of more nights like the one I just had. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My name is Sarah, and I'm 26 years old. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, a place where the thick woods meet quiet country roads and where everyone knows everyone's business. My first encounters with the supernatural began when I was just 3 years old. In 1987, my family moved into a house that once served as a caretaker's cottage on the edge of a cemetery. Though my memories from that time are hazy, I distinctly remember how it felt, like something unseen was watching me, a sensitivity to spirits that has lingered throughout my life. One of my babysitters often reminded me of a house we used to visit back then. There was a little girl who had tragically lost her twin sister. Every time we visited, I would scream uncontrollably until I was pulled away from the house. Growing up, strange things seemed to happen around me. One night, I was lying in bed when a large glowing figure flew through my window, sending terror through my body. Another memory, when I was around 4 or 5, still sends shivers down my spine. I was looking out the window of my mom's friend's house when I saw a figure dressed all in black, like a witch, walk past. The figure didn't look up, just stared straight ahead. Its long hair was hidden beneath a dark hood. I screamed, but no one believed me, despite my mom and her friends pulling the blinds down in a desperate attempt to calm me down. Night after night, I would feel like something was just outside my window. Sometimes, I'd fall asleep only to wake up to my bed shaking, like an unseen presence was trying to reach me. When I was 8, I had my first experience with sleep paralysis. I was at my aunt's house, a quiet farmhouse surrounded by fields, when I woke up in the middle of the night. I couldn't open my eyes, and a loud buzzing sound filled the room. In my mind, I saw shadowy figures holding torches, banging on the windows as if they were trying to break in. When I finally managed to open my eyes, the house was silent, and everything was still. These episodes of sleep paralysis became a regular part of my life, and they still haunt me to this day. As a teenager, the activity only grew. Footsteps outside my windows, strange figures in my peripheral vision, and unsettling dreams became an everyday occurrence. My younger sister also started experiencing things. One night, she swore she saw an old woman dressed in an old-fashioned gown, walking through the house, shaking coins in her hand. Nightmares and recurring dreams seemed to follow me everywhere. At 19, I had a strange experience that I'll never forget. My partner and I had a security camera set up in our front yard that was connected to the TV inside. One night, we noticed a small glowing orb moving around the yard. Intrigued, we decided to ask it questions, marking the tree and the car as yes and no markers. To our amazement, the ball seemed to move in response. We asked it to leave by the time we returned later that night, and when we came back, it was gone. By my 20s, things had only gotten worse. The sleep paralysis became more intense, often accompanied by the sensation of being watched by something dark and threatening. Sometimes I could see spirits clearly, almost like they were living people. One time, a young man appeared behind me, smiled, and said, "So, you're Sarah." I was startled and turned to respond, but when I looked back, he had vanished. After moving across the state with my young daughter, the activity escalated. One night, I was paralyzed in bed as a massive black shadow loomed over me. It felt menacing, suffocating. On another occasion, a spirit appeared beside me, offering soft words of comfort. He didn't frighten me, but not all spirits were so benign. Others appeared in my home, sitting on my couch, at the kitchen table, or even in the bathroom. Every night, the kettle would turn on by itself, and the TV would flicker on after I'd switched it off. Terrified, I sought help from a doctor, but he couldn't offer any solutions. I turned to a local metaphysical shop known for its mediums and healers. They were kind, offering their help free of charge. They came to my house with sage and other cleansing tools, performing a spiritual clearing. While they managed to remove some spirits, they warned me about the strongest presence in the house, one that might retaliate. And they were right. The activity grew relentless. Lights flashed in my mind when I closed my eyes. Growling noises and whispers in strange, foreign languages plagued me. One Sunday, I went to church for solace. During the service, I heard a terrifying scream, but no one else seemed to notice it. In desperation, I turned to spiritual warriors and mediums who gave me guidance. Despite their best efforts, the activity never fully ceased. The spirits seemed to follow me wherever I went, and my life became an unpredictable whirlwind of supernatural encounters. Electronics malfunctioned constantly, and strange events unfolded daily. Over time, I learned to live with it. The fear faded, but some nights were still difficult. Through it all, I've realized how important it is to find understanding people, those who can help you make sense of the unknown. Even now, the spirits remain. They never fully left. I'd like to share an eerie experience I had in Pine Hollow, a small town in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Pine Hollow was once a thriving coal mining town in the late 1800s, with over 2,000 people living there during its peak. Today, it's a quiet, almost forgotten place with fewer than 50 residents. The old buildings still stand, offering a glimpse into the past, while the mines that once fueled the town's growth are now open for tours. You can even hike up the steep hill to the old cemetery, which offers a view of the valley below. People say that back in the day, the townsfolk used to camp up there, as the long climb would leave any visitors too exhausted to complain. One of Pine Hollow's most intriguing spots is the cemetery, perched high on the hillside, overlooking the valley. There are over 1,000 graves scattered across the hill, many of them dating back to the 1800s. Local folklore tells of bodies buried upright to prevent them from sliding down the slope into the town. For me, cemeteries, especially old ones, have always been fascinating, not because they creep me out, but because of the rich history they hold. So naturally, I was excited to visit the cemetery in Pine Hollow when I was 15. I visited in the fall, and the town was eerily quiet. My parents, their friends, and I packed a picnic and made our way to the cemetery grounds. While everyone stayed down at the picnic tables, I eagerly climbed up to explore the old tombstones. As I wandered, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me, lingering just behind. At one point, while I bent down to read a weathered tombstone, I felt a distinct tug on the back of my jacket. I turned around, but there was no one there, just me alone on the hill. A chill ran through me as I hurried back to the others. My dad, always quick with a joke, asked if I'd been followed by a ghost. He'd noticed me constantly glancing over my shoulder. After lunch, we hiked up the steep hill to the cemetery. The climb was exhausting, and when we reached the top, my dad and I walked onto the field while the others rested. We were both surprised that the old players' field still had a sense of grandeur, despite the rugged terrain. Suddenly, we froze. Out of nowhere, we heard the unmistakable sound of a bat hitting a ball, followed by the quick thud of footsteps. It was brief but clear. Yet the field was completely empty. My dad, who's usually skeptical of anything paranormal, suggested we head back. Still, the sound had been unmistakable, like a game was playing, but no one was there. The day wasn't over yet. During the mine tour, nothing too unusual happened to me, but my dad kept feeling sharp, almost painful, pinches on his legs. At one point, he even turned to look at me, thinking I was messing with him, but I was standing right next to him, and there was no one else around. For a man who doesn't believe in ghosts, this left him more than a little confused. Years later, I returned to Pine Hollow with my friends, Lisa and Shane, who also share my interest in the paranormal. They wanted to visit the cemetery again, both during the day and at night. While I was fine with the daytime visit, the idea of going back at night made me uneasy. That afternoon we explored the cemetery, but soon enough, my fully charged camera inexplicably died. Lisa's camera followed suit, despite having a new battery. Only Shane's camera seemed to work fine. We shrugged it off, but the visit had an odd, unsettling vibe. That calm would soon shatter once night fell. After dinner, we returned to the cemetery. My flashlight, which had been shining brightly before, suddenly dimmed and flickered out. We were left stumbling through the dark, with only the faint beams of Shane's flashlight guiding us. The cemetery seemed darker now, much darker than the surrounding night. It felt as though a thick, suffocating darkness had settled over the graves, heavy and unwelcoming. The air was unnaturally still. While Shane took photos, I suddenly noticed something by the old stone fence, a shadowy figure. It was the silhouette of a man, tall and wearing a wide-brimmed hat. His movements were slow, deliberate, and his arms swayed at his sides. My heart raced as I asked if anyone else saw him. Lisa and Shane both confirmed they did. The figure's height seemed to shift, its movements unnaturally fluid as it slowly advanced toward us. My skin crawled as I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, and we all sprinted back to the car without another word. Later, we went through Shane's photos, but while they captured eerie, distorted images of the graves, there was no sign of the figure we'd seen. At the time, we couldn't laugh at how quickly we ran, because in that moment, the fear had felt all too real. Pine Hollow is undeniably fascinating and certainly haunted, But while I'd recommend a visit to anyone interested in history or the paranormal, I'm not sure I'll ever go back to that cemetery at night. I was born with what some folks refer to as a sixth sense, just like the rest of my family. Because of that, the paranormal has always been a natural part of my life. Spirits have crossed my path for as long as I can remember, and while they don't frighten me as much anymore, there are certain encounters that stay with you. One in particular stands out, and it's something I'll never forget. The house I live in now, with my mom and siblings, has always had its share of strange happenings. We notice spirits drifting through from time to time. Most of them don't stick around for long, but there's one spirit that has been with us for years. It's as if she's made this house her home. She usually stays near the living room, right outside my bedroom. From my doorway, I can see the archway that leads into the dining area and the kitchen. That's where she appears, but only after dark. She spends most of her time pacing back and forth, occasionally stepping into my room. I've never seen her face to face, but I catch glimpses of her shadow or her outline. She has her hair tied in a high, neat bun, and I can tell it's medium brown. She has fair skin, and she's about average height. She's always dressed in an old-fashioned light blue dress with long sleeves and a white apron tied around her waist. She looks like a maid from a bygone era. She doesn't bother me much, but she gets upset when the door to the living room is shut. I'm not sure why, but maybe it blocks her path. When the door's closed, she sometimes stands in the doorway to my room, watching my sister sleep, or she comes right in. When she's in my space, she does little things to grab my attention, shaking the bed, making noises, or even playing with my hair and ears. It's unsettling, but I've gotten used to it. One night, though, something happened that I'll never forget. My mom and I had stayed up late watching a movie called White Noise, a ghost story of all things. It was around 1:30 a.m. when we finally decided to head to bed. My mom fell asleep almost immediately, as she usually does, but it takes me about 45 minutes to fall asleep. As I lay there in bed, with my sister already fast asleep in hers, I began to feel a heavy presence in the room. It was strongest near my bed. At first, I tried to ignore it, like I usually do. But then, my heart started to race, and I realized I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed. That's when I heard it. A deep breathing sound, right beside my bed. It wasn't my sister. I could see her breathing softly in her sleep from the corner of my eye. My dog, who was lying next to me, was also calm, breathing steadily. I even held my breath to make sure it wasn't me. But the sound just kept getting louder, more intense, and closer. Then, I felt something flat pressing against my face, like a book or some object. I couldn't see it, and I still couldn't move. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. The whole experience only lasted a few minutes, but it felt like it dragged on forever. The air in the room was thick, dark, heavier than I've ever felt it before. Finally, I managed to turn my head just enough to whisper my sister's name. Chloe. I repeated it, louder each time, struggling to make her hear me. At last, she woke up, mumbling in confusion. I begged her to turn on the light, my voice trembling. Quickly, Chloe, turn on the light, I said. She must have sensed something was wrong, because she shot up and flicked the switch. The moment the light flooded the room, the breathing stopped, and I could move again. I sat up, shaking, tears streaming down my face as I tried to explain what had just happened. Chloe didn't question me. She understood immediately. We left the light on for the rest of the night, and for the next 2 nights, just to be safe. We hardly slept at all. That was the only time something like that happened, but I still get the feeling that something is sitting at the end of my bed from time to time. I wonder if it was the woman from the doorway, but I can't be sure. She's still here, pacing around or sometimes stepping into my room. I've learned to live with her presence, but that one night will always haunt me. When I was about 17 years old, I had an experience that forever changed the way I thought about the unknown. It was my first time trying to conduct a seance. My younger brother, Jason, and two of his friends, Ben and Mike, all about 15 at the time, decided to join me. I can't really remember why we chose that night. Maybe it was just the thrill of curiosity. It's funny how every generation seems to share that sense of wonder, no matter how much we tell ourselves things are different now. We gathered in the living room, sitting in a circle in the dim light of the old lamp. As the oldest, I naturally took charge. I can't recall the exact words I used to start the seance, but it was something along the lines of, "Is anyone here with us?" Or, "Can you hear us?" Almost immediately, something strange began to happen. Jason's friend, Ben, who was sitting next to me and holding my hand, suddenly went limp. His eyes fluttered shut, and his body slouched forward, his head dropping toward his knees in a way that made me feel uneasy. At first, I thought Ben was just trying to mess with us, pretending to be in some trance, but he wasn't the type for pranks. Ben was a quiet, reserved guy, nothing like the jokers we knew in school. This was different. Still, none of us had any clue what we were doing, so I decided to press on. I kept asking questions, though they escaped me now, while Ben remained in that strange, drooping position. The rest of us stayed connected in the circle, holding hands, trying to stay calm. The seance lasted only about 5 to 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity, especially for a group of restless teens. By the time we ended it, I started to believe Ben wasn't faking. If he was trying to prank us, there's no way he'd stay in such an uncomfortable position for that long. Something else was going on. When the session finally ended, Ben snapped back to reality, looking shocked, almost terrified. He couldn't remember anything that had happened, not a word I'd said or what had been going on around him. But then he told us something that gave me chills. He said he saw a flash of light, followed by the figure of his grandfather. He swore that the experience had been meant for him, and that somehow our collective connection had made it happen. A few years later, in my early 20s, I had another strange encounter at my oldest brother's house. It was a quiet night, and after my brother went to bed, his girlfriend, Megan, and another friend, Sam, joined me for a makeshift Ouija board session. Megan had been through a lot. She had lost her ex-husband, Rick, in a violent street fight years ago. The pain still lingered, and I could tell it haunted her. We set up our own version of a Ouija board, just letters and a glass on the coffee table. I once again took the lead. It didn't take long before the glass began to move, tracing letters with a purpose, spelling out Rick's name. The way it moved was unlike anything I'd seen before, almost like it was on a mission. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was guiding it. I suggested Megan remove her hand and ask only questions that Rick would know the answers to. The glass moved swiftly, spelling out the correct responses every time. Even though I don't remember the exact questions, I'll never forget the way Megan looked, her face caught between joy and sorrow, as though she had been granted a brief moment to reconnect with him. Then, just to test it, I asked Sam to take his hand off the glass, leaving only mine to guide it. To our amazement, the glass continued moving as if nothing had changed. The air grew thick with something unspoken, and in that moment, we all knew without a doubt that it was Rick coming through to speak to Megan one last time. The final experience took place several years later in 2010, and it was the most chilling of all. I can't get into all the details just yet, but it was tied to a missing child case, and it was far more complex than the previous two encounters. This time, I once again used a makeshift Ouija board, but I documented every question and every answer. These notes became part of a chilling account shared with a private group of trusted witnesses. I hope to share the full story when the legal restrictions are lifted, but for now, it remains locked away. Looking back on all three of these experiences, I've come to understand just how powerful these connections can be. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the emotions and memories from these encounters stay with you. They haunt you in ways that make you question everything you thought you knew about the world around you. I can't pinpoint exactly how old I was, but I know I was still in elementary school, somewhere between 5 and 9 years old. My family had just moved from Alaska to a small town in the Midwest after my mom married an older man from Ohio. I was only 4 when we left Alaska, and after staying a few months with my new grandparents, we finally bought our first house. The house wasn't very old, but weird things started happening almost right away. My toys would disappear, first a stuffed lizard, then a panda bear, and even a little silver mood ring with a tiny teddy bear on it. I never found the 2 stuffed animals, but I did find part of the mood ring. It was a special gift from my aunt in Canada, and I'd never worn it because it felt too precious. I kept it safely in a jewelry box on a shelf in my closet. One morning, I went to the box to play with some plastic bangles I kept there, but the ring was gone. I searched everywhere, in my room, around the house, and even outside, but it was nowhere to be found. My parents insisted I must have lost it, but I knew I hadn't. My little brother was still in a crib at the time, so there was no way he could have taken it. I was heartbroken. What I loved most about the ring wasn't the way it changed colors, but the little silver teddy bear playing the drums. There was nothing else like it. A year later, on my next birthday, it came back, but not the whole ring. I found the silver teddy sitting right in the middle of our dirt driveway, propped up on a rock as if it had been placed there deliberately. The rest of the ring was still gone. That was only the beginning. As I got older, even stranger things started to happen. Sometimes my things would end up in places I hadn't left them. I'd find my books open, even though I hadn't been reading them. At first, it seemed like little things, but then the shadows began to appear. I can't remember exactly when I first noticed them, or if they'd always been there and I just hadn't paid attention. What I do remember is that I talked to them, and they talked back. I don't recall the details of our conversations, but I remember feeling comforted by them and thinking of the shadows as my friends. One was tall and thin, with long arms. The other was shorter and rounder, with a face that reminded me of a dog, so I nicknamed it Scooby. They stayed with me until the day we moved out. Over time, we stopped talking, but I always knew they were there. However, one event stands out more than any other. It happened shortly before we left that house, and it's the one thing that truly scared me. It started with a dream, but it ended with something I still can't explain. The dream began with me walking down our street at night. The houses were dark, and the street felt different, like it wasn't quite my street. I noticed I seemed smaller, as though I were seeing the world from a child's point of view. Then I realized the houses looked wrong. Something was off about them. I walked toward a man sitting on a porch, though I knew my street didn't have houses with porches. He didn't seem to notice me as I approached. Then suddenly, I started clawing at his face, tearing it apart until it was bloody. That's when I woke up. I sat up in bed, relieved it was just a dream. The full moon lit up the room, and everything seemed normal. But when I rubbed my eyes, I felt something sticky. Looking down, I saw blood on my arms. I panicked and rushed to the bathroom, thinking it was just a nosebleed. But as I washed the blood off, I realized it wasn't dried or flaky, nor was it near my nose. It was fresh and wet, covering my arms and around my mouth. Nowhere else. I checked myself for scratches or cuts, but I found nothing. Confused, I went back to my room to check my bed. There was no blood anywhere on the sheets or pillow. Eventually, I fell back asleep, but I was on edge from that night forward. It's been 8 years since we left that house, and nothing like what happened there has occurred again. To this day, I still don't know what it all meant or why those things happened. When I was 18, I started experiencing a series of strange events in my house that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the supernatural. I've always been sensitive to paranormal activity, and I've had experiences with unexplained phenomena for as long as I can remember. I'm sharing this now to see if anyone else has experienced something similar or has any insight into what these events might mean. For context, my mother performed a cleansing of the house a while ago, which helped to stop the activity for a while. But lately, things have started happening again, and I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me. At the time, I was living with my family in a 2-story house we had built in a small suburban neighborhood. The layout was simple yet spacious. As soon as you walk in, there's an open living room to the left, and a door on the right leads to my dad's office. Straight ahead is an archway into the kitchen and dining area, which opens up into the rest of the house. There are 2 sets of stairs. One leads to the bedrooms and bathroom upstairs, while the other takes you down to a finished basement that connects to the laundry room and garage. Now that you have the layout, let me tell you about what happened. For as long as I can remember, I've always felt uneasy in our house. It was like something was always watching me. I would hear strange noises, see things out of the corner of my eye, or feel like I was being touched. The most unsettling part was that it always happened when I was alone. One of the strangest occurrences began in my bedroom. I had a walk-in closet that I always kept shut. For years, I couldn't even think about leaving it open. It was just a habit. But when I was 16, I decided to start leaving the door open. At first, nothing unusual happened, but that all changed after I rearranged my room. One night, while I was lying in bed, I turned to face the closet, and there he was, a young boy, standing inside, staring at me. But it wasn't just the boy that scared me. Behind him stood a tall, shadowy figure. I couldn't make out its features, but I knew instantly that whatever it wasn't good. It felt like the source of the strange energy in our house. Terrified, I turned away, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then I felt it, someone climbing into bed beside me. I could feel the weight shift on the mattress as they lay next to me, running their fingers through my hair and lightly touching my back. It was the kind of touch that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't move. Eventually, fear turned into exhaustion, and I managed to fall asleep. After that night, the boy seemed to become a permanent presence in the house. I'd see him walking around, and sometimes I'd catch glimpses of other spirits, like a woman who I often mistook for my mom, or a small, fluffy white dog that would dart around the house. I even felt it brush against my leg one time. I wasn't the only one who saw these things. One night, I was with a group of friends, and we decided to head upstairs. As we reached the top of the stairs, the little boy from my room was standing at the top, staring down at us. We all saw him, and in a panic, we ran back downstairs as fast as we could. But the shadowy figure that followed him felt even darker, more threatening. I didn't feel safe anymore, even when I wasn't alone. The first real encounter with this dark figure happened when I was home alone with my best friend, Rachel. We were sitting in the living room, watching TV, when suddenly, we turned the TV off and got ready to sleep. The house was dark except for the streetlights outside, and I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched. I kept my eyes closed, not wanting to look, but curiosity got the better of me. When I finally opened my eyes, I saw a tall, dark figure standing in the hallway under the archway. Its presence felt so sinister that I almost cried out. I shut my eyes again and tried to fall asleep, but the feeling didn't go away. The second incident happened when Rachel and I decided to sleep downstairs. Everyone else was upstairs with their doors closed. It was quiet until we heard heavy footsteps running down the stairs, followed by a loud crash, as if something had slammed into the kitchen table. The noise was so loud and jarring that I thought it might have been my dog, but the footsteps were too heavy. It didn't feel right. I quickly ran upstairs, calling for my dog, but I found my dad talking to him in his room. I checked my brother's room. He was sound asleep. I ran back downstairs to Rachel and told her everyone was in their rooms. We were terrified, but eventually we fell asleep. The next morning, I told my dad what happened. He told me he had heard the noise too and thought it was us. Later, we noticed that a chair near the stairs had been pushed under the table, almost like something had slammed into it. My mom had her own experiences. She would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was standing over her, watching her sleep. She also heard voices calling her name when no one else was home. My younger brother, who was about 10 at the time, would wake up terrified and sneak into our parents' room to sleep on the floor. Later, he admitted he saw a black figure standing in the kitchen every night, slowly getting closer each time. Eventually, he moved his bed and started keeping his door shut, and the sightings stopped. There's no history attached to our house. We built it ourselves, and it was part of a new development, so I wonder if something about the land, or even something connected to us, might have brought these things to our doorstep. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I was 17, I left my mom's house for the first time. It was December 2010, and my best friend and I rented a small house together in Pine Lake, a quiet town in the middle of nowhere. The house was old, built in the 1950s, and it always felt cold, no matter the season. My bedroom, in particular, was freezing, and I had to bundle up in blankets just to fall asleep, since I can't stand being cold at night. One night, I went to bed around 10:30 p.m. while my roommates stayed up. I had a guinea pig at the time, and she stayed in my room. About half an hour later, something woke me up. As I lay there, I noticed a strange, heavy breathing filling the room. It was coming from somewhere inside the room, and it was loud enough to make my heart race. Some people later wondered if it could have been someone outside my window, but my curtains were thin. If someone was standing outside, I'd have seen their shadow. At first, I thought the sound might be my guinea pig, but she was wide awake, her fur standing on end, staring at the corner of the room. The breathing didn't sound like it was coming from her. It sounded like a woman, breathing heavily as if she were shivering, or maybe even struggling for air. It was hard to describe, but it felt wrong, unsettling. After a minute, I bolted out of bed and ran to the kitchen, where my housemates were still awake. I told them what happened, and they followed me back to my room to check it out. By the time we got there, the breathing had stopped. One of them went outside to see if anyone was around, but there was no one. The other stayed with me to listen, but we didn't hear the breathing again that night. It was my first experience with something paranormal, but definitely not the last. A couple of months later, I moved back in with my mom, who lived just down the street. One night, I fell asleep with the TV on, as I often did. I woke up suddenly to the same heavy breathing. This time, it wasn't as cold, but it still made my blood run cold. The second I moved, the breathing stopped. I didn't tell my mom. She wouldn't have believed me. I stayed up the rest of the night, listening for it, but nothing happened after that. A few weeks later, something even stranger happened. I always left my clothes for the next day on a chair in my room before bed. But when I woke up the next morning, they were no longer there. Instead, they were neatly folded on top of my dresser, right in front of my TV. I had been home alone, so there was no way anyone else could have moved them. Around the same time, my mom had her own strange experience. She told me she heard my bedroom door close and called out my name, but I wasn't home to respond. She said it didn't sound like a door slamming. It was more like someone quietly closing it, as if they didn't want to be noticed. For a while, nothing else happened. Then, in November 2011, I moved again, this time to a friend's place in a neighborhood called Immersion, on the other side of town. One night, my boyfriend, my friend, and I were hanging out. My friend suggested we try a makeshift Ouija board using paper and a shot glass. I didn't think it would work, and honestly, I still don't know if it did, but something strange happened. My boyfriend had a little too much to drink, and the three of us, me, my friend, and my boyfriend, placed our fingers on the shot glass. My friend's friend stayed on the couch, not joining us. As we asked questions, I was pretty sure my boyfriend was just moving the glass to mess with us. I kept calling him out on it, but the third time I accused him of faking, there was a loud noise from the kitchen. It sounded like someone was messing with the silverware. That was enough to make us stop. After that, things settled down for a while. In February 2012, I went on a trip to Portugal, and nothing strange happened while I was there. When I came back, my mom had moved to a new place in Hobart, a city a few hours away. I visited her a few times, and everything seemed fine, until my last visit. At her new house, I had a habit of leaving the TV on while I slept, because it made me feel safer. In the US, there's a channel that plays reruns of old sitcoms all night, and I liked to leave it on. One morning, I woke up to find the TV on a completely different channel, a news channel I'd never watched before. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think too much of it. Then, a few days later, it happened again. I left the TV on that same channel, but when I woke up, it was on a completely different one. I haven't seen any figures or shadows, but these little things keep happening, and it's starting to feel like something is watching. Growing up, I was always a sensitive and energetic kid. I used to worry about the smallest things and was often called the most paranoid person in my family. As I've gotten older, I've learned to let go of the little things and not stress as much. But what happened last year is something that still lingers with me, something that terrified me so deeply at the time. To give you some context, I come from a family of 6. I'm the second oldest daughter, and we were always known as the all-American family because of how close we were. My parents seemed to have a perfect relationship. My dad worked a high-paying job that required us to move from city to city, while my mom worked part-time at a local car rental company. Despite their different jobs, my childhood felt stable and secure. We lived in a big, beautiful house just outside of Denver. My mom often asked my dad to consider downsizing, worried that the mortgage was too much to handle, but my dad always insisted we were fine. To make ends meet, my mom worked extra jobs, adding more pressure on her. Over time, the stress and tension began to take a toll on their relationship. My dad ended up having an affair. My mom forgave him the first time, but when she caught him again, it shattered all of us. It was especially hard for me because I had always been close to my dad. He was the one I confided in with my personal struggles. He was the one who truly understood me. This experience changed me. It made me appreciate my mom more and understand that her strictness came from a place of love. We're much closer now, and I respect everything she does for our family. Sorry for the long backstory. Now, let me tell you what happened. The night my mom caught my dad with another woman was when everything started. My younger siblings were staying at my grandparents' house, and I had just finished my shift at the supermarket. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I got home and planned to cook dinner for myself and my older sister, Emily. She hadn't come home yet, but I expected her soon. As I was cooking chicken in the kitchen, I started hearing strange noises from upstairs. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I was too distracted by the thought of my mom confronting my dad. But then I heard a few thumps, and my attention snapped back. I stopped cooking and listened, but the noises suddenly stopped. After serving dinner, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Emily. I'd been sitting there for about 10 minutes when I heard a voice. It was deep and gravelly, like an old man mumbling. The sound startled me so much that I jumped out of my chair. I couldn't make out the words, but the voice was unmistakable. A moment later, my vision blurred, and I felt dizzy, like I was surrounded by people I couldn't see. Panicking, I ran across the house and shouted, "Leave me alone." Moments later, I heard the garage door open and ran to meet Emily as she came in. I threw myself into her arms and told her everything. Emily had never seen me like this, and she believed me immediately. She convinced me to go back inside, even though I was terrified. We ate dinner together in silence. Then my mom called, confirming our worst fears. She had caught Dad with another woman. It left us feeling worse than we already did. After dinner, Emily went to take a shower and suggested I distract myself by using the computer in the study. I logged onto Facebook and started chatting with my friend, Connor. He had experienced some strange paranormal events before, so he tried to comfort me. He suggested that it might be poltergeist activity caused by the negative energy building up around me. Given how stressed I had been about my parents, it made sense. But as we were talking, I heard footsteps coming down the hall toward the study. I froze and typed frantically to Connor, telling him what was happening. The footsteps stopped right outside the door, and suddenly, I felt an overwhelming sensation of someone standing behind me. It was unlike anything I had ever felt, like the air around me had a presence. Every hair on my body stood on end. Terrified, I bolted upstairs to Emily's room and hid under her covers, praying for safety. When Emily came out of the shower, she found me on her bed, shaking. I told her everything, and she stayed with me to calm me down. Later, we went downstairs together, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. For the next few weeks, the strange activity continued, but only when I was alone. One night, I was watching TV with my puppy, Phoebe, when we both heard footsteps upstairs. Phoebe ran straight to the stairs, barking and growling. I followed her and shouted, "Go back to where you came from. You don't scare me anymore." After that, the noises stopped. Thankfully, we don't live in that house anymore. We downsized and moved into a new place in a quieter neighborhood, and I feel so much safer here. Emily has a psychic friend who told us that there's an old man in our new house, but he's harmless and protective. I believe it because I never feel uneasy here. Even though I'm in a better place now, I still think about what happened in that old house. I don't know if it was poltergeist activity or something else entirely, but those experiences were incredibly real to me. Emily is the only one who truly believes me. Whatever it was, I'll never forget it. My name is Emily, and I'm 16 years old. I live in a small town in Ohio, and I've always been fascinated by the supernatural. I know some people might think I'm just another teenager who watches too many horror movies, but trust me, I've spent years researching ghosts, spirits, and everything in between. And if you're curious about Ouija boards, take my advice and stay away from them. But this story isn't about Ouija boards. Stick around to find out what happened. This took place in March 2010 when I was 14. My best friend at the time, who I'll call Sarah, and I had been inseparable for about a year. She was the youngest in her family, and the only one still living at home with her parents. It was the night before Sarah's birthday, March 19th, and I was staying over at her house. I'd planned a surprise birthday party for her the next day, and she had no idea. That night, Sarah's parents went to bed early, around 8:30 p.m., so by 11 p.m., it was just the two of us. We were upstairs in the kitchen area, talking and chatting with our friend James over Skype. We had the webcam on so we could see each other while talking. Everything felt normal until James suddenly said, "Hey, what was that thing that just moved in the background?" Sarah and I exchanged confused looks. We hadn't noticed anything. We told him, "James, you're just trying to mess with us, and it's not going to work." But James didn't sound like he was joking. "No, seriously, there was a dark figure that moved behind you on the webcam." We turned to look behind us, but there was nothing there. Behind us was Sarah's living room, which was on a lower level than the kitchen. The webcam had a clear view of the couches and TV, but the room was dark since it was almost midnight. We dismissed James's comment and went back to chatting. About 10 minutes later, we heard loud thumping noises on the walls. These weren't normal noises. They sounded like someone was pounding hard on the plaster. Sarah didn't seem scared, but I could barely keep it together. She had told me before that her house was built on land where Civil War soldiers had once camped, and she mentioned strange occurrences like objects falling off shelves. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating, but now I wasn't so sure. The thumping grew louder, like it was moving closer to us. I panicked and quickly logged off of Skype. Not knowing what else to do, I opened a Word document and started typing the Our Father prayer. I'm Catholic, and it was the only thing I could think of to protect us. Sarah wasn't religious, and she struggled with some of the words, but we held hands and said the prayer together. We said it twice, but the noises didn't stop. Sarah suggested it might be her dog making the noise, but I hadn't seen the dog all night. She usually stayed in the yard. I refused to let Sarah go check alone, so we both walked through the living room toward the main hallway. That's when things got even worse. As we entered the living room, we heard footsteps running up and down the basement stairs. The stairs were visible from where we were standing, but no one was there. We bolted into the bathroom and locked the door. I jumped into Sarah's arms, shaking with fear. She laughed nervously and said, "It's probably just a ghost." I didn't find it funny at all. "If it is a ghost," I said, "it should know I'm scared and leave me alone." Suddenly, the footsteps moved from the stairs right into the bathroom. We felt something approaching us. That was enough to make us run out of the bathroom and back upstairs to the kitchen. I was on the verge of tears. Sarah decided to call her mom, who answered groggily and asked why we hadn't just gone to her room. Sarah explained everything, and her mom quickly came out to meet us. We walked into the living room together, and as soon as we did, I saw a shadow pass by. Sarah's mom also felt a chill and got goosebumps all over. Her mom reassured us, saying, "It's late, and it's your birthday tomorrow, Sarah. Go to bed, okay?" The noises stopped after that, but I still didn't feel safe. We headed down to Sarah's bedroom, which was in the basement. We ran down the stairs, jumped into bed, and pulled the covers over our heads. Just as we were starting to calm down, we heard the footsteps again, running down the basement stairs. "Oh my God, it's back," I whispered. We clung to each other, too scared to move. The noises eventually stopped, and we managed to fall asleep, but I'll never forget that night. The next morning, we got up early for Sarah's birthday. We didn't mention the night before because we didn't want to scare anyone. After Sarah left for the movies with her boyfriend, I stayed behind to help set up for her surprise party. While I was sitting at the kitchen table, her mom joined me and said, "Did you notice I got goosebumps last night as soon as I walked into the living room?" I nodded. "Yes, I did too." Her mom then said, "You know, I'm starting to think it was Sarah's grandmother." Sarah's grandmother had passed away from cancer the year before, and her mom believed she might have been visiting for Sarah's birthday. This happened a few months ago at my friend Michael's house in a small town in Oregon. His house has always had a strange reputation, and it's not just me who's experienced it. Our other friends have seen things too. There's a little boy and a little girl who roam the dining room and living room, a woman who seems to watch over the master bedroom, and a tall, shadowy figure that often stands in the doorway between the kitchen and the dining room. On this particular night, there were 3 of us in Michael's bedroom. My other friend and I were sitting on the bed, joking around, while Michael was near the TV, looking for a DVD for us to watch. Earlier, we'd been hanging out in the living room, laughing and being silly, but by that point, we were all very aware that there were spirits in the house. Some of them felt downright malevolent, while others were simply unsettling. I called out to Michael to hurry up and put the DVD in. He told us it was in the living room, but none of us wanted to go out there after the creepy experiences we'd already had that night. Jokingly, I said, "Yeah, Michael, go out and hang out with all your friends." The moment I finished that sentence, we heard a voice. It was deep, almost demonic, and it clearly said, "Yeah, you." The voice was so loud and distinct that it froze us all in place. My friend and I looked at each other, our mouths hanging open in shock. Michael laughed at first, thinking we were just messing with him. But when he saw the expression on our faces, he jumped onto the bed with us, and we all sat there, absolutely terrified. About 20 or 30 minutes later, we heard scratching at the door. Thinking it was the dog, I got up to check since no one else wanted to get near it. I opened the door, but there was nothing there. I closed it and sat back down, telling the others there was no one outside. But almost immediately, Michael said he felt the bed lifting beneath him, and I saw it happening with my own eyes. It was one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced. Michael's house is always strange like that, and this wasn't the only unsettling thing I've experienced there. On another night, 4 of us were staying over. His parents were fast asleep in their room, and since Michael was an only child, it was just us and a few other friends hanging out at 2 a.m. We were talking about ghosts when I suddenly heard something. I told everyone to be quiet, and soon we could all hear it, voices coming from his grandmother's old room. She had passed away a few years ago. The voices were a man and a woman having a conversation, complete with whispered laughter and responses to each other. We couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, but we stood frozen, listening for at least 10 minutes. The voices were clear, but there was no one in the room. Then we heard scratching at the door to Michael's parents' room. This time, Michael and I got up to check. We thought it might be the dog wanting to come out, but as we reached for the door, it opened on its own. We looked inside and saw his parents still asleep, snoring. As we reached to close the door, a hand grabbed the doorknob from the other side and pulled it shut. The hand was dark, almost like it had been burned, and I believe it belonged to the woman's spirit who lingers near his parents' room. Another chilling moment occurred when I was communicating with the little boy's spirit. I have a gift that allows me to talk to spirits, and I could tell the boy had been burned. When I asked him about it, he confirmed with a yes. After our conversation, my friend and I went to the kitchen to grab a drink. That's when we noticed something strange. A small fingerprint made of soot on the white kitchen table, with a chair slightly pulled out, as if someone had leaned on it. On the chair was the tiniest handprint I'd ever seen. We tried to figure out if any of us had made the print, but none of us could replicate it. We even tested different chairs and positions, but nothing matched. It was obvious the print wasn't ours. What made it even stranger was how spotless the house always is. Michael's mom is obsessive about keeping it clean. The soot fingerprint stood out so clearly, it was impossible to miss. Michael's house is full of activity, and these are just a few of the things we've experienced. It's unsettling, but also fascinating. I still think about that voice, the hand on the door, and the little boy with the burned hand. In my family, both immediate and extended, we've always had our share of experiences with the paranormal. Ghosts and spirits are something we grew up with, almost like an accepted part of life. We're not experts, but we've had enough encounters that it's become normal to us. Recently, however, something strange came up during one of our many family gatherings, something none of us could quite explain. I'll start with my own experience. About 3 years ago, during one of those sweltering summer nights, I decided to sleep in the kitchen. The house was too hot, and my mom and little sister had already claimed the lounge room. At that time, my mom was facing some pretty serious health challenges. She was scheduled for a quadruple bypass surgery soon, which made things feel even more tense around the house. I'm not sure if it's relevant, but I feel it's important to mention. That night, I woke up right at midnight. I know because I could clearly see the clock on the wall. Standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the lounge room was a tall figure. He was dressed in a long, dark trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat, the kind you'd see in old detective films. But what stood out was that he wasn't looking at me. Instead, he seemed to be staring into the lounge room. It was almost like he was observing something, or someone, else. But strangely, I didn't feel like he was watching my mom or sister. He stood there completely still, almost blending in with the shadows, like part of the house itself. For some reason, I wasn't scared. I just turned over and fell back to sleep, like it was a normal part of the night. The next morning, I told my mom about it. She didn't say much at first, just that it was interesting. But then, after a short pause, she shared something that made my blood run cold. Her sister had seen the exact same figure walk up her driveway one afternoon, broad daylight. That detail stayed with me, but I didn't think too much about it at the time. A few months later, I was talking to my cousin, someone I'm really close to, and mentioned what I'd seen. I barely started describing the figure when she cut me off. I saw him too, she said, almost matter-of-factly. She told me that it happened years ago during one of our big family gatherings. The kids had been playing hide and seek. She and another cousin had climbed over a fence to hide, facing the road. When she glanced across the street, there he was, standing beneath a streetlight. This time, he was facing her. She couldn't make out his face because the brim of his hat cast a shadow over it, but she could tell it was the same man. Curious, I asked the cousin who had been with her if he remembered. He confirmed it right away, no hesitation. And then he mentioned that his mom, my aunt, had seen something similar when she was young. Her encounter had been indoors, though. She'd been a child at the time. And one night, she and her sister had seen the same man standing in the doorway to their bedroom. He never moved or spoke. He just stood there staring. As we spoke with more family members, we realized this wasn't an isolated incident. At least 3 aunts and 5 uncles, from both sides of the family, had all seen the same figure. He was always described the same way, a tall man in a dark trench coat and hat. Sometimes he was inside the house, other times outside, but in every instance, he never did anything threatening. He didn't speak, didn't make any gestures. He was simply there, watching. What's odd is that no one ever saw him more than once. It was always a singular encounter. None of my friends have ever seen anything like this. It's as though he's a family ghost. But have any of you experienced something similar? There's one more thing I should mention, though. We're of Eastern European descent, Russian, to be specific. In our culture, we have a tradition of the domovoi, a spirit believed to watch over the home and the family living in it. It's thought that each family has its own domovoi, and when they move, a new spirit takes its place. The figure I saw, this tall, shadowy man, reminds me a little of the domovoi, but there's a key difference. The domovoi is tied to the home, to the family's residence, while this man has been seen both inside and outside. He doesn't quite fit the description of a traditional house spirit, but there's something undeniably familiar about him. Is it possible that he's tied to our family in some way, or is he something else entirely? What do you think? It started with the footsteps. They echoed down the hallway of my childhood home for nearly a year. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, maybe a creaky floorboard or two, but it never stopped, not even when my dad had the carpets replaced. The footsteps just faded away after that, like they were never there. I didn't question it, though, because by then, I had grown used to the sound. But that wasn't the only thing that began to happen. About a month after the seance, I was alone in my room, probably pretending to do homework, though I'm not sure I even tried anymore, when a scream cut through the silence. It was a child's scream, sharp and high-pitched, like something from a nightmare, and it came from under my bed. The house was completely still, no TV, no radio, no sound at all, except for that scream. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. I wasn't sure if I should check or if I should just run, but I stayed still, my breath shallow. I had a friend back then, Michael. He was just as obsessed with the supernatural as I was, and we'd spend hours talking about what was happening in my house. He'd come over a lot, sometimes for days, and after a while, he started sensing the same things I did. We noticed the figure, the one we'd both seen walking up and down the hallway. We called him the tall man, because of the way he seemed to loom over everything. He wore a top hat, and his clothing looked like something out of a different era, almost Victorian. It was hard to explain, but the presence of him felt so real. We also started noticing a young girl, whom we eventually decided to call Rose. Her presence was much gentler than Tall Man's, but it was just as strong. We thought she was the same girl that others had seen around the house over the years. At first, we thought Rose was scared of the tall man, like she was hiding from him, safe only when she was near me. It seemed to make sense. Tall man would stop right outside my door, the footsteps ceasing as if he were standing guard. This continued for about a year, and we grew used to it. Shadows flitted around the corners of the house. Reflections in mirrors seemed wrong, and we saw things out of the corner of our eyes. It was unnerving, sure, but it became just part of the house. By the time I was graduating from high school, Michael had moved in with me and my dad. One night we were lying on the trampoline in the backyard, staring up at the sky. The only light came from the faint glow of the kitchen, leaking through the cracked blinds of the spare room, the one we always called the junk room. We were watching the tall man again, pacing back and forth. But then something changed. At the exact same moment, we both sat up, our bodies stiff with cold dread. We didn't even have to say anything. It was as if we both knew, and we whispered, almost in unison, "There are two of them, aren't there?" We'd always seen just one figure before, but now there were two. And both were as tall as the first. This new one wasn't Rose. It was just like Tall Man. The sight of two identical figures standing together was a shock, and we couldn't move for what felt like forever. But they kept walking around the room like they didn't even notice us watching them. That night changed everything. From then on, we began to see Rose, Tall Man, and something else. A third presence. This one was different. It didn't feel like the others. It was darker, colder, more unsettling. It never fully showed itself, staying hidden in the shadows. We started calling it Shadow, because that's exactly what it felt like a presence that was always there, lurking just out of sight. We began to wonder if we misunderstood it all. Maybe Rose wasn't hiding from Tall Man after all. Maybe she was hiding from Shadow, and Tall Man, the figure we thought was so menacing, was actually protecting her from it. It was a terrifying thought, but it made sense in a way we couldn't ignore. Life went on, and we adapted to living with the three of them, Rose, Tall Man, and Shadow. Then we started hearing about similar experiences from other people. Stories from all over the country, small towns, remote neighborhoods, places just like ours, described the same figures: a tall man in a top hat, a young girl, and this eerie, shadowy figure no one could fully explain, but everyone felt uneasy about. It wasn't until a couple of nights ago that I remembered it all. An old friend came over for dinner. She mentioned something strange happening at her sister's house, and as she spoke, a chill ran down my spine. The things she was describing, it was the same trio: Rose, Tall Man, and Shadow. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. A few years ago, I heard something that made me wonder if children are more sensitive to the spiritual world than we realize. What happened to my best friend's son convinced me that there might be some truth to it. It's a story we still talk about from time to time. About 13 years ago, my best friend and I, along with our boyfriends, were inseparable. We joked around and called ourselves the Fab Four. The guys had been best friends since childhood, and naturally, the four of us did everything together. We were incredibly close. One of those boyfriends was David, my partner at the time. Unfortunately, David went through a very difficult period in his life, and eventually, he took his own life. The grief that followed was unimaginable, and it changed all of us forever. The funeral was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. The priest gave a sermon about David's life, but all the details came from David's father, with whom he had a strained relationship. The information seemed off, some dates were wrong, and we felt the eulogy didn't really capture who David truly was. Looking back now, I realized David's father was grieving deeply and probably didn't know David as well as we did, but at the time, we were too upset to see it that way. We just felt it didn't do justice to his memory. After David's passing, the Fab Four came to an end, although we all remained very close. 2 years later, my best friend and her boyfriend had a son, Archer. When Archer turned 4, something truly remarkable happened. One morning, my best friend woke up to hear Archer talking to someone in his bedroom. Thinking he was just having an imaginary conversation, she walked in and asked him who he was talking to. Archer looked up and said, "It's David. He plays with me a lot." My best friend was stunned but didn't think much of it, assuming it was just a coincidence. David is a pretty common name. Later that day, I stopped by to visit them, and as I walked into the house, I heard Archer laughing and talking as if someone else was there. I asked my best friend if a friend was visiting, and she explained that Archer was alone and told me about what he had said earlier. We tried to recall any moment when we might have mentioned David around Archer, but we couldn't think of a single time. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Archer casually mentioned, David had a red car, but you used to tease him and say it was orange. We froze in our seats. This was true. David had an old Chevy Camaro that he was obsessed with, and we used to joke that it looked orange, even though David insisted it was red. We even nicknamed the car Jaffa. There was no way Archer could have known about this. On another occasion, I was in the car with my best friend and Archer when Archer suddenly said, David told me to tell you not to worry about what was said at the church. He thinks it's funny that the man got it all wrong. We were completely speechless. Archer was talking about the sermon at David's funeral, something he could not have known about. Over the next couple of years, Archer continued to mention David, often sharing small personal details that left us in awe. For example, one day he said David liked cheeseburgers from McDonald's with lettuce on them. It was true. Another time, he told us David collected baseball cards, but lost them all one day while riding his bike to school. These were personal stories that David had shared with us years earlier. Each time, we were able to verify the details, and each time, we were left speechless. As Archer neared 7 years old, he gradually stopped mentioning David. Maybe as he grew older, his connection to the spiritual world started to fade. But we couldn't help but feel that David was trying to send us a message, that he was okay, and that we didn't need to carry the guilt of his passing. Even now, we find comfort in the thought that David stayed close to us through Archer, leaving behind small, unforgettable signs that he was still watching over us. It was around 2011 when everything started, though I can't pin down the exact dates. By the beginning of 2012, the strange occurrences had mostly faded or at least became less frequent. In my house, there's a rule about going to bed at a reasonable hour, but since it was the holidays and I was 16 at the time, I figured the rule didn't apply to me. One night, just after 1 a.m., I thought I heard my mom get up. There were small sounds that made me stop what I was doing on the computer. Then came the light, deliberate footsteps, medium in stride. They weren't my dad's footsteps. His are heavier, more solid. I figured it was too late to shut everything down and pretend I had just coincidentally stayed awake, so I stayed still listening. There was a small gap between the computer room and the laundry room, where the bathroom was. I kept staring at the opening, waiting to see my mom, but no one appeared. It made me uneasy, so I decided to check. Naturally, she was still asleep. The footsteps continued every time I stayed up past 1 a.m. They always followed the same path, through the kitchen, and then they'd stop near the living room. I wasn't particularly frightened, so I tried to ignore it, continuing to use the computer. But each time I heard the sound, I couldn't help but wonder what might happen if it decided to take a different path. The idea of it walking down the hallway toward me made my skin crawl. I'd have nowhere to hide. Soon enough, I started going to bed earlier, not because I was terrified, but because I didn't want to risk hearing those footsteps. Once I adjusted my bedtime, they seemed to happen less often. Even when I was awake but lying in bed, I didn't hear them anymore. Maybe it was because I wasn't in the computer room, I'm not sure. One morning, my dad casually brought something up. Around 2 a.m., he said he'd been woken up by a woman's voice calling to him. Since my mom doesn't talk in her sleep, he knew it wasn't her. He couldn't make out what she was saying, but after drifting back to sleep, the voice came again at 3 a.m. on that same night. I woke up to a woman's voice, too. It felt like it was speaking to me, but the details seemed different, almost like it was from a different place or time. I told my dad that I thought the presence might be female, especially after hearing the light footsteps and now the voice. He didn't seem too worried, but it left me with more questions than answers. By the end of the year, things had mostly quieted down, though not without one last scare. It was another late night. I had just turned off the light and rolled over to sleep when I heard the familiar creak of the hallway floor. It sounded like someone was walking toward my room. My heart pounded as the footsteps grew closer. Then I felt a light pressure on my side, like someone's hand resting gently there. The sensation lingered, and I could almost feel a presence hovering over me, as if someone was leaning in, checking on me like a parent would check on a child. I was too afraid to look, and even if I had, I don't think I would have seen anything. After that, the activity stopped completely. I've often wondered who or what that presence was. A woman, perhaps, passing through, searching for something or someone. I still don't know who she was or what she wanted, but that whole experience still lingers in my mind, leaving me to wonder if she'll ever return. It was my first home in the United States. I had just been offered a stable position with an American engineering firm to conduct environmental tests for future offshore oil rigs. The job required me to spend extended periods in remote locations, primarily on the East Coast. At the time, it seemed like the fresh start I needed. I had just gone through a painful divorce after 11 years of marriage, and I was desperate for a change. I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, in July 2001, and rented a small room in a men's boarding house on King Street near the historic district. It was a simple setup, just a place to sleep. After a few months of this, I began feeling restless. The lack of privacy wasn't ideal, so I started looking for a home of my own. By October, I found a charming old house in the historic district of Charleston. The house was a Victorian-era townhouse, built around the 1890s. Its thick brick walls and wooden floors gave it character, and the restoration had been done beautifully. The house had a modern kitchen, a second bathroom, and a large open living area in the back. It was perfect for me, so I bought it, with a little help from the bank, and moved in on December 14, 2001. I quickly made the house my own, filling it with furniture I loved and personal touches that made it feel like home. At first, life in the house was peaceful. I settled in, enjoying the quiet that came with the old neighborhood. But that tranquility didn't last long. Within days, I started noticing odd things happening. To give you a better sense of the house, let me describe it. Upon entering the front door, you'd walk down a narrow hallway that led straight to the kitchen and the original dining room. Doors lined both sides of the hallway. To the left were my bedroom, my home office, and the main bathroom. To the right were my sons Jason and Shane's rooms and a guest bedroom. At the end of the hallway, the house opened up into a large living room where we'd unwind and watch TV. Beyond that was the kitchen to the left, with a breakfast nook on the right. Further down the hallway were the laundry, a second bathroom, and a new addition, a formal dining room and a larger lounge, complete with a pool table, a TV, and a PlayStation 2. The lounge also had double doors leading out to a backyard patio. The backyard was spacious and well kept, a favorite spot for the kids to play. There was even a wine cellar beneath the kitchen floor and a two-car garage on the side. But soon, I began to sense that something was off. At first, it was subtle, a strange, unshakable feeling, like someone was watching me. It was strongest when I was in the kitchen, but I shrugged it off as just the stress of settling in. Then things became more noticeable after I adopted Louie, a 2-year-old Jack Russell and Fox Terrier mix. I got him from a local shelter, thinking he'd make good company, but Louie's behavior quickly caught my attention. He would often stare at the wall near the refrigerator, wagging his tail or barking softly at nothing I could see. Sometimes he would give that silly dog grin, as if something invisible was making him happy. Out in the backyard, Louie would suddenly stop running, start spinning in circles, or stand on his hind legs, as if playfully asking for someone to join him. Other times, he'd roll over on his back, lying there with his paws in the air, as though someone invisible was rubbing his belly. There were moments when he'd bark excitedly and extend a paw, like he was trying to shake hands with someone I couldn't see. At first, I thought he was just being a silly dog, but as it became more frequent, I started to worry. I took him to the vet, but they found nothing wrong. Eventually, I came to a different conclusion. Louie had made a friend, one that couldn't be seen. This friend seemed harmless enough, and Louie appeared to enjoy their interactions. Since Louis wasn't scared or agitated, I decided to let it be. From that point on, Louis continued to play with his invisible companion, and it became just another odd part of life in the house. Another strange thing began happening in my bedroom. Like all the original rooms in the house, it had an old fireplace, one that hadn't been used in decades. Above the fireplace was a shelf with a large old mirror framed by ornate woodwork. I had always liked the mirror. It was handy for checking my appearance before heading out to meetings. One night, I woke from a deep sleep, the silence of the house hanging heavily in the air. In the dim glow of the moonlight, I saw an elderly woman standing in front of the full-length mirror. She was dressed in clothing that looked like it belonged to the early 1900s, an old-fashioned dress with lace at the collar, her hair neatly styled in a bun, and she held a small tin in one hand. With delicate movements, she pinned her hair back, the soft sound of metal clips echoing in the room. She didn't seem to notice me at all, as if I wasn't even there. For a few minutes, she focused entirely on her reflection, calmly doing her hair, before vanishing into thin air, like smoke carried away by the wind. I was so startled that I jumped upright in bed and let out a sharp exclamation, but she didn't react. She simply continued, as though nothing had happened, ignoring me completely. Over time, this became a routine. She appeared regularly, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. The scene was always the same. She'd stand by the mirror, quietly pinning her hair, and then disappear without a trace. I tried everything to get her attention, shouting, moving around, but nothing worked. She never acknowledged me. Eventually, I came to think of her as nothing more than an imprint, a faint trace of someone who had once lived in the house. She never appeared anywhere else or tried to communicate, so I decided to leave her be, letting her continue her silent rituals. But there was another mystery in the house, a ginger cat. It became a familiar presence, often seen pacing the hallway between my office and the bedroom. The cat would stop at my door, scratch at it as if wanting to come in, then disappear, fading away before my eyes. My sons and I witnessed this strange sight multiple times. It wasn't just confined to the hallway. We also saw the cat outside, sitting under the old magnolia tree in the backyard. The tree, tall and full of twisting branches, offered plenty of shade, and it seemed to be the cat's favorite spot. One day, my curiosity got the better of me. I approached the cat, but as soon as I got close, it sprang up and dashed around the base of the tree before vanishing. I was left standing there, puzzled. Driven by curiosity, I grabbed a flashlight and began searching the ground around the tree. What I found shocked me. A small homemade cross was leaning against the trunk, weathered with age, the word Freddy faintly painted on it. It dawned on me that someone must have buried their beloved cat, Freddy, under the tree and marked the spot. It was touching to think that this person had cared so deeply for their pet. I gently placed the cross back where I had found it, quietly apologizing for disturbing the spot. From then on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Freddy's spirit was still keeping watch over the house, still feeling like it was his domain. Every time I saw him wandering around, I'd say softly, "Hey, Freddy." Of course, he never responded, but it was comforting to see him moving through the house like he still owned it, just like cats do. There were other strange little happenings in the house that I grew used to. 1. Sometimes I would feel a light kiss on my cheek in the middle of the night. It wasn't the kind of kiss you'd get from a lover, but rather the soft, gentle kiss a mother might give her child. This happened once or twice a week, until one night I finally said out loud, "Please stop." After that, it never happened again. 2. My things often moved. I'd leave my keys, phone, and wallet on the small table beside my bed, only to find them neatly arranged on the shelf in front of the mirror above the fireplace by morning. At first, it irritated me, but then I decided that the shelf was actually a better place for them, so I started leaving them there on purpose. After that, the moving stopped altogether. 3. Almost every night, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway. They'd start at the front door, walk past the guest room, and continue down the hallway before stopping near the kitchen. The footsteps would pause, as if someone was standing by the stove. Then they'd go back toward the guest room. It happened twice a night, almost every night. Since nothing ever seemed to harm me, I didn't mind. Every now and then, I'd hear faint, disembodied voices calling to each other from somewhere in the house. I couldn't make out their words, but it added to the eerie atmosphere, leaving the house shrouded in mystery. Despite all these strange occurrences, I always felt safe. The house had a certain calm about it, a quiet presence that didn't feel threatening. I lived there peacefully until 2005, when I decided to move on. I sold the house to a family with 5 children who needed the space, but sometimes I wonder if the house still feels the same for them. Does Freddie still watch over it? Does the elderly woman still do her hair by the mirror? I guess some mysteries are meant to remain unanswered. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Hello everyone, I'd love to hear where in the world you're tuning in from, so please leave a comment. If you're enjoying these episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. When I was younger, my family moved into an old Victorian-style house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but we could barely afford it, so we made it work. The house had a history, one that wasn't easy to ignore. Originally, it had been a small schoolhouse before it transformed into a soup kitchen during the Great Depression. In its later years, it was home to a groundskeeper and his family. After the groundskeeper passed away, the family left, and the house was rented out to various tenants over the years. The last one, a woman who loved cats, passed away in the very same house. Our first strange experience happened on the very first night we moved in. We had our pets, 2 cats and a dog, settled in the kitchen and utility room on the ground floor. The dog was in the kitchen, and the cats were in the utility room, which had a door that led outside to the backyard. We made sure the door was securely shut, and the pets were confined to their spaces. But when we woke up the next morning, we found that the animals had swapped rooms. The dog was in the utility room, and the cats had found their way into the kitchen. We thought maybe someone forgot to shut the door, but this kept happening night after night, until one day, my dad decided to let the animals upstairs, which made all of us, especially the kids, relieved. A few weeks later, my dad started cleaning out the basement, which was little more than a damp, flooded hole during the rainy months. He'd work on it when it was dry, but for some reason, the family dog always insisted on following him down there. One day, while my dad was working, the dog started pawing at one particular corner of the basement, digging insistently. It was odd, but we shrugged it off. Then at dinner one night, my sister casually mentioned a nightmare she'd had. I can't recall all the details, but she said she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw a man, a terrifying figure with dark eyes and an intimidating stare. Though she never mentioned it again, she developed insomnia soon after. I too began having trouble sleeping in that house. The whole place felt different, cold even during the warmer months. By the time I was about 9, the house had become more rundown. Most of the family had moved out, leaving only my dad, my younger brother, and me. One day, I decided to clean up the attic, which had become a storage space for old furniture and junk. I spent hours clearing it out, and when I finished, my dad suggested I move into the attic and make it my own bedroom. I agreed excitedly. I was a huge Doctor Who fan at the time, so I decorated with posters, including one of the Sisters of Plenitude. But as time passed, I started feeling uneasy. The poster seemed to stare at me, and I began to have dreams where I'd experience the events of the next day. Some nights, I'd wake up with the feeling that I was being watched, and I'd run downstairs, convinced the poster had changed. But when I looked, it was always the same. I could never shake the feeling that something was off, and I stopped going up to the attic altogether. The ground floor became a place we avoided. No one was particularly scared of it, but there was something unsettling about it. It was always darker, no matter how many lights we turned on. and it had this strange, heavy air that we couldn't escape. Then the strange occurrences started. Objects would go missing, only to turn up in places we had already searched. One time, my dad's debit card disappeared after a friend had visited. My dad was angry, convinced his friend had misplaced it, but hours later, the card was back in the spot they had already checked. We all started suspecting the house was haunted, and our friends agreed. We eventually moved out, but we all came to believe the ghost was the woman who had loved cats. She didn't feel threatening, though. If anything, it felt like she was looking out for us, as though she considered us part of her family now. The house felt like it had become her home too. I never spoke to the new tenants of the house, but sometimes I wish I could have. I didn't fully realize how much I'd come to love that house until after we left. It was only once we were gone that I truly understood how significant it had been in my life. Still, I wonder if the house feels like home to the woman who once lived there. I've always been a night owl. My parents would go to bed at least 5 or 6 hours before I did, so I would often stay up late, sometimes until 2 or 3 a.m. or even later. One time, I stayed with my dad in a small town in the Midwest, and I had never experienced anything paranormal before. But during that stay, something happened that I'll never forget. After my return to the small town of Pine Lake, I moved back in with my mom. It was a fresh start, but that first night, something felt off. I stayed up late, around 2 a.m., though I can't be sure of the exact time. That's when I first heard it. Soft footsteps on the stairs. It sounded like a cat, light and delicate, climbing the old wooden steps. But my mom and her boyfriend were fast asleep in their room, so who, or what, could it be? I peered through the crack in the door, expecting to see something, but there was nothing. I told myself it was just my imagination, and returned to my computer. But the next night it happened again. The same footsteps. Only this time, there was a strange creaking noise at the top of the stairs, like someone was standing there. I'd lived in that house for years before leaving for Germany, so I knew every creak and groan of the old wooden floors. This was different. The tension in the air felt thicker somehow. For weeks, the noises continued, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I finally told my mom, and she sighed, looking at me with a mixture of concern and resignation. Since Jake moved in, she explained, we've had strange things happening here. Whispers, cold spots. I had never believed in ghosts before, but at that moment, I couldn't deny it anymore. She continued, telling me that sometimes, in the middle of the night, she'd hear the sound of something bouncing across the floor, a marble, perhaps, rolling for several seconds before going silent. When she went to check, there was never anything there. Then there was the TV. It would flicker off at random, but only during my younger sister's children's programs. The oddest part was that it seemed to only happen when she wasn't in the room. But that wasn't all. My little sister, barely 3, refused to go into the small bathroom downstairs. She kept saying there was a little girl in there, one who would watch her with sad, empty eyes. We never talked about spirits around her, so how could she know? The more I thought about it, the more I began to wonder if something really was in the house. My curiosity got the better of me, and I started reading up on how to communicate with spirits without resorting to a Ouija board. I was told to simply talk to it. I did, and that's when things took a darker turn. The cold feeling in the house grew stronger, a constant shiver that crawled down my spine. It was as if something was pushing down on me, squeezing the air from the room. I'm not one to wake easily, but one night I was jolted from my sleep by the sharp sound of something scratching just beside me. I sat up, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. The silence that followed was deafening. The next time it happened, I was walking into my room when I heard the familiar creak, this time right outside my door. I froze, remembering how the floor only made that noise when someone stepped on it. But when I looked, no one was there. I called out to my mom, but there was no reply. My heart pounded as I stood there, my mind racing with questions. What was happening to us? The worst part, though, was the feeling I got whenever I walked into the house. It felt like a barrier had been set up, something invisible but heavy, pushing against me. It was like walking through water, struggling with each step. as if the air itself was thick with something unwanted. I remembered my mom telling me about her past experiences with poltergeists. Though she hadn't gone into detail, I knew she'd struggled with mental health during that time, and we both suspected that the strange events had something to do with the paranormal. I didn't remember much, but she once told me I'd mentioned seeing white sneakers under my door or a figure standing in the garden, something white, blurry, like a shadow. This all started in our old house, right after my mom's affair. That's when things began to change. As the strange events kept happening, I couldn't help but wonder if the past had somehow come back to haunt us. But what I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of something much darker. On the night of Friday the 13th, the Midnight Echo paranormal team set out on an exhilarating ghost hunting expedition at Ravenswood Manor, located in a quiet town in Maine. With the expertise of their senior tech specialist, Mark, the team aimed to stream the event live for their dedicated followers. After battling some early technical glitches, they finally managed to broadcast the night's eerie happenings. The number of viewers who tuned in was astonishing, and the team was grateful for the thousands of paranormal enthusiasts who interacted with them through their social media accounts. Ravenswood Manor had quickly become a favorite among the Midnight Echo team, and it wasn't hard to see why. It was an ideal spot for paranormal investigation. The sprawling manor, set against the backdrop of dense forest and rugged hills, had 3 stories filled with history. It was a place that could hold your attention, especially on a night like this. The team would like to express their gratitude to Tom, the caretaker, whose unwavering support ensured everything went smoothly. Tom was always a delight to work with, and no task was too big or too small for him. With a full crowd gathered inside Ravenswood Manor, anticipation hung thick in the air. The atmosphere was charged, knowing that this particular Friday the 13th had the potential to bring forth something truly paranormal. After Tom's insightful lecture on the manor's history, including some chilling accounts from the past, and a quick tour of the building, it was time for the team to break into smaller groups and begin the investigation. But before the official event kicked off, something unsettling happened. While Karen was setting up refreshments alone in a side room next to the main hall, the kitchen door slammed shut with a force that sent a shiver down her spine. Mark and Chris, who were preparing the live streaming setup in the adjoining room, assumed at first that the door near them had been kicked open, but when they checked, there was no one nearby. Minutes later, Karen walked over, visibly shaken, and explained what had happened. She said the door had slammed shut all on its own. After examining it, it was clear that no natural force, like wind, could have caused it. The door was sturdy and heavy, and no one could replicate the force needed to slam it shut. Was this the work of a poltergeist? As the investigation unfolded, the team's experiences varied. Some groups encountered little to no activity, while others witnessed increasingly intense paranormal phenomena. There were reports of unexplained movements of objects, strange sounds, and even K2 meter spikes. The spirits in Ravenswood Manor were unpredictable, with some nights offering an eerie quiet, while others were filled with restless energy. As the night went on, the energy inside the manor grew stronger. In one of the smaller rooms, a spirit child named Lily made her presence known during a seance. Her interaction had a profound effect on the group members, including Sarah, Michael, and Ellie, all of whom had been skeptical at first. Sarah, in particular, was emotionally affected by the experience, admitting later that it was her first ghost hunt, but certainly not her last. Karen and Grace, meanwhile, had their own chilling encounters. Their flashlights flickered on and off seemingly at the command of unseen hands, an occurrence that continued throughout the evening. Extreme table tipping, reported by several team members, became a regular occurrence. At one point, the temperature dropped dramatically, and all of them felt the cold brush of a spirit against their faces. One of the most terrifying moments of the evening took place in the attic. Ben, one of the more fearless team members, screamed out and stumbled forward in fear after claiming to see the face of a ghostly figure standing just behind him. His reaction was immediate and genuine, leaving no doubt that he had encountered something beyond the ordinary. As the ghost hunt came to an end, the team thanked the participants for their bravery and, of course, the spirits for their interaction. It had been a night filled with strange and unexplained events, leaving everyone with plenty to reflect on. The evening didn't just bring ghost stories, it brought real experiences that would linger in their minds long after the lights went out. Underscore 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 underscore. It was 1991, and I was 17. My friend Lisa and her partner Dan had just welcomed a baby boy, Zachary. He was small but beautiful, born a month early due to complications. Despite his early arrival, Zachary was strong and healthy, with a loud set of lums that could be heard all the way from the front yard when he cried. No matter what time of day or night, if Zachary made even the slightest whimper, Lisa and Dan would rush to check on him. They doted on him endlessly, ensuring he had everything he needed. But over the next few days, I noticed that Lisa and Dan weren't around as much. Concerned, I stopped by Lisa's mother's house, just a few doors down, to see if they were there. Iris, Lisa's mother, told me that Zachary had stopped feeding a few days ago and was in the hospital. They said he would be home later that day. Then the phone rang. It was Dan. He said Zachary had stopped breathing. His heart had unexpectedly stopped, and the doctors couldn't do anything to save him. He was only 2 months old. Lisa and Dan were devastated. For days, they argued and blamed each other, each feeling a profound loss in different ways. Eventually, Dan left. I tried to support Lisa as best I could. I even stayed with her for a few days, sleeping on the couch. We'd sit up late at night, talking through the pain. Lisa couldn't bring herself to sleep in their room. The crib was still there, a constant reminder of their loss. The day of the funeral arrived, and Dan came to stand by Lisa's side. The tension between them seemed to dissolve as they stood together. Dan confessed how lost he felt without her. A few weeks later, Dan returned home with a framed picture of Zachary, enlarged and carefully mounted above the fireplace in the living room. That's when things began to take an eerie turn. We all started hearing the unmistakable sound of a baby crying as though Zachary was hungry. Anyone who's been a parent knows the difference, and this was no ordinary sound. The mobile above the crib, which they had moved to the spare room, began to play by itself, its soft lullaby filling the empty house. But it didn't stop there. The framed picture of Zachary refused to stay on the wall. No matter what they used to hang it, the picture would be found on the floor each morning, but it was never damaged. Unable to bear the unsettling occurrences, Lisa decided to stay at her mother's house, taking the picture with her. But the same strange things began to happen there. The crying, the objects being moved, and the picture falling from the wall. At first, Sarah thought the strange happenings were somehow following her, so she returned home, but she left the picture behind. Things, however, only got worse. The baby's cries grew louder, lasting longer, and the picture was always found by the front door the next morning, no matter where it had been placed the night before. Sarah and James began arguing once again. Sarah blamed James for having the picture taken, but James insisted it wasn't his idea. He said the nurses at the hospital had done it for them. Sarah was confused and asked him to explain. James told her that the nurse, an old friend of his, had taken the picture of their son, Lucas, before he passed away. He said she had dressed Lucas, taken a picture of him, and had it enlarged so they could remember him. But Sarah was confused. Lucas had been hooked up to machines the whole time, and none of that was visible in the picture. When Sarah asked James when this had happened, He explained that the nurse had taken the picture just after Lucas passed, before bringing him into their room to say goodbye. The very picture that was now causing all the disturbances in her mom's house. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She had her father burn the picture. The crying stopped. The mobile in the nursery stopped playing on its own, and the objects that had been moving around the house stopped. Sarah always said that Lucas was still there, but couldn't rest until the picture had been destroyed. James, though, thought she was losing her mind, but couldn't explain the strange occurrences either. Eventually, Sarah and James separated for good. Whenever Sarah visited Lucas's grave, she said she could still hear the mobile's music, faint and distant, like it was somewhere close, but never loud enough to pinpoint. I even heard it once when I went with her. A few years later, Sarah moved away, and we lost contact. But every time I pass the cemetery where Lucas is buried, I still say hello to him, just like Sarah used to. This all happened in 2008, just a few weeks after I had moved into my dorm room at university. I had been napping on my bed one afternoon when I woke up, needing to use the bathroom. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, but what happened to me that day was definitely not that. I was lying on my back, and when I woke up, I felt an overwhelming pressure holding me down. It wasn't just the feeling of someone pressing me. It felt more like a thick, invisible mass surrounding my entire body, preventing me from moving even slightly. The pressure wasn't physical. It felt like an unshakable weight, and I just knew that if I could get off the bed, I'd be fine. I could see my phone on the nightstand and was desperately trying to reach it. I don't know how long I struggled, but the next part of the experience is still so vivid in my mind. I looked down along the bed, and there, lying on its side, was a creature. It was so real, so clear, and it was just lying there staring at me. It seemed completely calm, unnervingly calm. That stillness scared me the most. It knew I was struggling and seemed to take pleasure in it. The creature was on my right side, and I was trying desperately to roll to my left side, facing the wall, away from it. I got a good look at it, trying to figure out if I was imagining things. The creature's appearance still disturbs me. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was covered in thick, bumpy scales. The skin was uneven and rough, with strange, muddy colors, a mixture of deep reds and dull blues. It wasn't very tall, nor particularly muscular, but its fingers were long, almost unnaturally so, with what appeared to be long, dirty claws. The creature appeared and disappeared in different places on the bed. Each time it vanished, I felt a brief sense of relief, thinking it was gone, but then it would reappear, either at the foot of the bed or by my left side. It stayed close to my face for a while, and I could feel its hot breath on my skin. I heard its breathing. It was thick, raspy, and right in my ear. I closed my eyes in terror, but I could still feel its fingers gently stroking my hair near my forehead. The touch was oddly soft, but it felt so sinister, like it was twisted in some way. I silently prayed and begged for it to leave, but it seemed to know I was powerless. It could feel my fear, and it understood that I couldn't do anything to stop it. Then suddenly, the breathing stopped. The stroking stopped. I don't think it was because of my prayers. It felt like it left on its own accord. This entity wasn't physically strong or forceful, but it had an unsettling, otherworldly power that terrified me the most. Finally, I managed to get off the bed. It was difficult to sit up, and when I tried to walk to the bathroom, which was only a few feet away, I felt dizzy and unsteady, like I was swaying. I immediately called my friend, who was also at the university, to tell her what had happened and ask if I could stay with her that night. After that day, nothing else happened in that room. However, since moving back home from college, there have been a few strange occurrences at my house, though nothing as intense as that day. They're unsettling, but not nearly as extreme. We've lived in many houses over the years, each with its share of strange happenings, what we Americans call things that go bump in the night. But this experience made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. and it left me questioning everything. As a family, we moved multiple times, trying to escape the unsettling figures, strange smells, the TV turning on or off by itself, and so on. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It didn't matter how many times we moved. It always felt like whatever was haunting us just followed us wherever we went. Eventually, we realized that running away didn't solve anything, especially when these things decided to tag along. Last week, it happened again. I came home from work, just like any other day, and greeted everyone as I walked through the door. Then, as usual, I went upstairs to change. For context, I leave the house every morning at 6:30 a.m., and if you're enjoying these episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. My brother had been dating this girl from high school, and I happened to be friends with her sister. They invited both of us over for a sleepover at their house. The house was built on land that used to be farm fields, and nearby, there were preserved native burial grounds, locked off by the town. When we got there, our friends began sharing ghost stories about their house. My brother, uninterested in any of it, decided to go to bed with his girlfriend. Meanwhile, her sister, Alex, and I stayed up in the garage, smoking and chatting about different places we'd been. Alex told me about a war veteran's spirit that haunted their house, mostly hanging out in the garage. She didn't know his name, but said he'd told her he wasn't from around here and had been searching for his wife. He said he'd fought in the late 1800s. As we talked, shifting topics, I noticed a hockey stick mounted on the wall next to me begin to move. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a draft, but then an umbrella beside it suddenly popped open and hit me, spinning in a small circle. Alex looked over at me and said, "See, I told you, he's here. He must like you." The night went on, and Alex and I stayed awake the whole time. She shared that another spirit lived in her room, a little boy. She couldn't make out his features, only his shadowy outline. Alex told me her sister used to sleep on the bottom bunk, but now slept on the top with her because she'd felt like she was being suffocated in her sleep. They both thought the boy was around 5 or 6. The next morning, my brother and Alex's sister woke up, and we decided to play cards. My brother was lying on the couch, dozing on his back. A few minutes later, I heard him making strange noises, like he was having trouble breathing. "Yeah, he snores," I told the girls, but this wasn't normal. I'd never heard him like this before. I shook him awake, and when he opened his eyes, he looked disoriented and scared, as though he didn't know where he was. He quickly fell asleep again, but this time on his stomach. Suddenly, his body began to shake as though he were having a seizure, and his breathing became labored. Alex, her sister, and I rushed over, trying to roll him over, but he felt impossibly heavy, like dead weight, around 300 pounds, though he only weighed 100. We struggled but managed to turn him, but his face stayed pressed into the couch as though something was holding it down. In a panic, I grabbed my cross, pressed it against his cheek, and prayed. After a minute, the shaking stopped, and he woke up. I asked him, "What were you dreaming about?" His eyes were wide with terror as he replied, "Honestly, I don't think I was dreaming. It felt real." He explained that at first, he was standing in a field with a little boy whose features were hard to see. The boy just stared at him, and he stared back. My brother hadn't heard the story about the little boy from the night before. He continued, "Then it felt like I wasn't even really there, just watching. I saw the same boy get dragged into the middle of the field by an older man, who suffocated him with a pillow until he died. We were all shaken, but tried to brush it off and went back to playing cards. I sat facing the back patio door, while the others had their backs to it. As we played, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw a little boy running across the patio outside. Then he vanished. The sunlight cast a shadow where the boy had run, making it unmistakable. It was hard to believe. Later, Alex and I searched online to see if there had been any reports about a little boy dying or being murdered in that area. We found nothing. I've experienced strange things throughout my life, but one memory stands out. When I was 18, I was house sitting at my grandparents' home with my two cousins while we waited for the house to sell. They were both the same age as me, and neither of them wanted to sleep in the basement. They believed there was something wrong with it. Being the only guy, I got stuck with the basement bedroom. I didn't mind. I thought it was funny how spooked they were. One afternoon, while napping, I woke to the sound of my door opening and closing. The room was dark, so I kept my eyes shut, thinking my cousins were trying to scare me. I could hear faint giggling, which only confirmed my suspicion. Determined to get the last laugh, I planned to jump out and scare them when they got close to my bed. I lay still, listening to the soft giggles and deliberate footsteps drawing closer. With each step, they came nearer. It was late one night when I heard the footsteps again. They were so close that I thought they were right beside me. I shot up from bed with a loud shout, ready to confront whatever was making the noise. But when I looked around, the room was empty. No one was there. Not only that, the entire house was eerily quiet. I told my cousins about what had happened, but they refused to even go near the basement after that. It felt as though it had become my space, completely mine. And strangely, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't scared of what I thought was just a playful spirit. Staying there didn't bother me at all. A few years later, another strange experience happened while I was living in a small town in Ohio, not far from Lake Erie. I was dropping off a friend late one evening when I took a wrong turn and ended up on a street that I didn't recognize. The road was quiet, isolated, almost as if I had wandered into a forgotten part of town. The air felt heavy, and a light fog hovered just above the ground. The street was dim, no streetlights, not even the glow of a porch light anywhere. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been swallowed by darkness. The road wasn't even paved, but made of old, cracked bricks, and the houses that lined the street were worn and aged, giving off a sense of age-old history. But still, there was no movement, no sign of life. It was completely still. Goosebumps prickled my skin as I drove further down the street. It felt like I had stepped into another time. Halfway down, I decided to turn around, but something kept me from looking back. It was as if the road itself had swallowed the world whole, leaving me in some forgotten corner of time. I drove around the area a few times over the next few weeks, trying to retrace my steps, but I never found the street again. The old brick road and those strange, lived-in houses seemed to have vanished, as if they had never existed. I wasn't on drugs, and I wasn't overly tired. Everything felt too real for that. It's still hard to explain. Maybe it was a new development that hadn't been finished yet, but those houses didn't look new at all. They looked like they'd been there for years, possibly decades. I still wonder about it to this day, and I'm left with a lingering sense of confusion. Was it all a trick of the mind, or had I stumbled upon something I wasn't meant to see? When I was a kid, my grandmother, on my mom's side, passed away in the fall of 1992. I was born just a month later, so I never got the chance to meet her. My mom would always tell me how I would have called her Mama instead of Grandma, and she'd tell me stories of how my siblings and I would keep her company when we were little. When I was a child, my mom would hear creaks in the house, doors slamming, and sometimes even the sound of me giggling or talking to someone when she put me down for a nap. She always believed it was my grandmother visiting me, making sure I wasn't alone, making faces to amuse me when I was by myself. Eventually, we moved to a new house, but we kept the rocking chair that had belonged to my grandmother. It was the chair she'd always used for knitting. One night, when I was about 12, I had the most vivid dream. I was sitting on a couch, and my grandmother was sitting across from me in that old rocking chair. We talked, and she told me to keep my head up. She said life was full of struggles, but I had the strength to get through them. Those words stayed with me for years. I would tell my parents about hearing strange noises or seeing things, but they just brushed it off as my imagination. One day, my mom finally had to get rid of the old rocking chair. It was falling apart. But a few years later, she bought a new one for knitting. One afternoon, I saw my mom sitting in the new chair, knitting as usual. Suddenly, she jolted up, screamed, and dropped her knitting. She held her ear, looking completely shaken. I rushed over to ask what had happened. She said she heard my grandmother's voice in her ear, scolding her, "You're stitching it wrong. The thing is, my mom is deaf in her left ear." Another time, my family visited my grandmother's grave to honor her. My mom was crying, saying how much she wished my grandmother could have met her grandkids. She stood there, and I saw her, my grandmother, standing beside her. She smiled and whispered, "I'm too." I've never told my mom about that moment. I don't want to upset her, but I like to think that my grandmother is still with us, keeping an eye on the family. It feels like there's a sense of peace, a sense of understanding between them. When I was 17, my grandfather passed away. We were all at the funeral, and the grandchildren were given a white rose to place on his casket. I couldn't do it. I held onto my rose and walked away from the ceremony. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. In December 2013, my son was born. Now, I hear him giggling and talking to himself when he's alone, just like I used to. I believe my grandparents are visiting him, watching over him like they did for me. It's a comforting thought, knowing they're still here with us. One night, Colton and I were driving home from his parents' house. The snow had been falling heavily, and the roads were slick with ice. The quiet, peaceful drive soon became something else. We live in a small town called Pine Ridge, somewhere in the hills of Kentucky, and Colton's parents live about an hour away near a secluded spot called Willow Creek. The roads were slick with ice, so we took it slow, but as we drove, I couldn't help but notice how unusually large the moon was, casting an eerie orange-red glow on the snow-covered landscape. Being someone who follows old spiritual practices, I took it as a sign to be cautious, especially with how treacherous the roads were. I kept the worry to myself so I wouldn't spook Colton, but I did ask him if we could drive a little slower. It was around 1 a.m. when we finally reached the outskirts of town. As we approached the first set of traffic lights, out of nowhere, a dark figure appeared right in front of the car. Colton slammed on the brakes, and just as we blinked, it vanished. Thankfully, there wasn't anyone behind us, or we might have been rear-ended since the light had just turned green. Colton, a gentle soul who's been dealing with heart problems over the past 2 years, gripped his chest and started crying. For a split second, he thought he had hit someone. I reassured him that we hadn't, explaining that I'd seen the figure vanish as soon as we stopped. He pulled off to the side of the road, visibly shaken and desperate for answers. He kept asking what had just happened, what he had seen. While Colton knows I believe in things beyond the normal world, he's only had one strange encounter before, and nothing like this. The figure reminded me of something you'd see in old stories. A shadow entity. Not just a regular shadow, but the kind that seems to show itself as a trickster, playing games with you. But the energy from this one felt far darker than anything I'd ever encountered. We drove home cautiously, and while Colton eventually fell asleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, everything seemed to go back to normal. Colton went about his day like nothing had happened. That night, as we climbed into bed, he curled up beside me like he always does, his head resting on my arm. His usual twitching began, something he's always done in his sleep. But tonight it quickly turned violent, like he was trying to escape something. Suddenly, he bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat, his eyes wide with fear. I calmed him down and asked what had happened. He told me about his dream. In it, we were driving home from his parents' place, just like we had the night before. But when he glanced into the rearview mirror, he saw a massive, dark figure sitting in the back seat. For context, Colton drives an old, cramped Mustang, and in the back seat, there's barely enough room for a person to sit comfortably. But this figure was so large, its knees were pulled up to its chest, and its head was bent low because of its height. Its face was horrifying, cat-like, with yellow, glowing eyes, no discernible nose, and a wide, jagged grin stretching from ear to ear. It stared at me with such malice that Colton said he could feel its hatred. In his dream, Colton stopped the car and rushed to my side, but I was gone. The figure was gone, too. He searched the car frantically, screaming my name, but when he woke up, he was still shaken, unable to explain what had just happened. For the next 2 nights, Colton avoided sleep, still haunted by the terror of the figure. He woke up fine each morning, but the fear lingered in his eyes. On the third night, he fell asleep quickly, but an hour later he woke me up, convinced that I was dead. In this dream, he said, he had opened his eyes and saw the shadow figure hovering over me. I was turned away from him, and the entity had a look of pure fury. Colton screamed at it, but the figure lunged at him, placing a long, spindly hand over his chest. Fighting back, Colton grabbed its arm with one hand and punched through its chest with the other. The shadow screamed in agony before darting toward the closet and vanishing into thin air. That's when he woke up, finding me still in the same position I had been in during his dream. For context, I tend to breathe very shallowly in my sleep, occasionally stopping altogether, which may have contributed to his panic. But what he described, and what I later saw, was far too unsettling to ignore. As Colton drifted back to sleep, I glanced at the large mirror near the closet. I swear I saw the shadow figure glaring at me through the reflection before it turned away and vanished into nothingness. Since that night, we haven't experienced anything further, but Colton is still deeply shaken by the encounter. In April 2013, I moved into a rundown apartment in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly the best. It was small, crowded, and privacy was a luxury we didn't have. I shared the apartment with my roommate, Sarah, who was deeply interested in the supernatural but did her best to avoid anything she considered too dark or dangerous. At the time, I had a 7-month-old son, and Sarah would often watch him while I was at work. Her boyfriend, Mike, would stay over frequently. Mike had his own share of strange experiences, especially when it came to the paranormal. One night, after I tucked my son into bed, we all sat down to talk. Sarah seemed a bit reluctant, as though just talking about these things might trigger something unwanted. I, on the other hand, didn't hesitate to share. I told them about the uneasy feeling I'd been having for a while, that something dark seemed to be following me. I mentioned that if it wasn't my late grandparents my son was seeing, then it had to be something else entirely. My son had this habit of staring off past me, pointing at nothing. Sarah didn't want to hear it though. She said it didn't sound like something she wanted to get involved with. The next morning, I noticed 3 pennies placed above each door. Apparently, it was her attempt to ward off whatever might be lingering. But clearly, it didn't work. That evening, I came back to find my son peacefully sleeping in his crib and 2 very shaken babysitters. Sarah and Mike told me that while they were on the balcony earlier, she had been sitting in a chair, and Mike had been standing, facing into the kitchen. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. Sarah heard it, but Mike actually saw it happen. He claimed he watched as the dish rack slid across the counter and crashed into the sink. They tried to recreate the incident, checking if the counter was slanted or if there had been any water to cause it to slide, but nothing explained what they had seen. We decided to let it go for the night, but the next morning, Sarah woke me up, trembling. She was pale, clearly shaken. "Shauna," she said, "I have no idea what's going on here. Last night after Mike and I went to bed, I turned off the light, starting to fall asleep when something grabbed an object near my head. I felt a breeze as it flew across the room and slammed into the wall. We went to her room to check, and there, against the wall, was a flashlight. She wasn't sure it was the object she had felt, but Mike and Sarah were both convinced of what they had experienced. A couple of nights later, Mike and I stayed up late watching a show called The Dead Files. As we sat there in the quiet of the living room, he suddenly turned to me and said, "Shauna, there's something going on in this place. Sarah hasn't told you everything because she's too scared. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way." It was just another day of babysitting Curtis when something strange happened. I was playing with your dog, Lily, like I always do, when out of nowhere, she bolted down the hallway and stopped dead at your bedroom door. She froze there for a moment, her body stiff with fear. Then, without warning, she turned and ran back to me, her tail tucked between her legs, like she had done something wrong. You know how she gets when she thinks you're about to scold her. That's exactly how she acted. I felt this cold shiver run through me. Lily never barks, so how would I even know if she was in danger? Or if we were? I looked at Curtis, and without even meaning to, I whispered, I know something's here. Curtis sees something we can't. It was a gut feeling, a chilling certainty. It felt like someone was standing right behind me, watching me. The sensation made me so anxious, it was almost unbearable, like I was going to throw up, pass out, or worse, have a heart attack. That night, Lily refused to come to bed. I had to physically drag her in, and that wasn't the first time. Mike's face turned pale when I told him. He sat there in silence for a moment, then finally spoke up. Shauna, I'm not scared of much. I've seen things. I've faced things that would make most people run. He paused, shaking his head. But Sarah's closet? That scares the hell out of me. I was stunned. What do you mean? He hesitated, looking lost in thought for a moment before he continued. The other night, I was waiting for her to turn on the light. I couldn't move, couldn't look. It was like something was watching me, something. I don't know, just wrong. He sighed deeply. There's definitely something here. None of us has seen it yet, but I feel it, and it feels like things are just starting. I nodded, my heart heavy with that same feeling. My roommate and I knew we needed to figure this out before it got worse. This all reminded me of when my great-nephew was 2 years old. He had an imaginary friend. He called him my guy. At first, it seemed harmless, but as time went on, it became clear that my guy was far from ordinary. It all started when my niece, Sarah, bought a house in an old neighborhood near the edge of town. It was a big 2-story house, recently renovated. The upper floor had been turned into a loft, while the lower floor still had that old, eerie charm. It had high cathedral ceilings and skylights that made the living room feel both beautiful and haunting. The staircase had been moved during the renovation. When I first visited, I was amazed at how it looked, modern yet with so much of the old house's character. Sarah had gone through a rough divorce, and this house was her fresh start. The price was unbelievable, way too good to be true, almost. During the house tour, we were in the kitchen when the ceiling lights flickered. Sarah casually mentioned that it had been happening for a while and needed to be checked. I suggested calling an electrician, as it could be a dangerous short circuit. As we talked, I caught something strange in my peripheral vision. I turned my head quickly, but there was nothing there. Still, in the corner of my eye, I could make out the faint outline of a staircase, an invisible set of stairs. I even saw legs, like someone was walking down them. But whenever I focused directly on it, it vanished. Sarah must have noticed my odd behavior because she asked me what was going on. I hesitated, but then decided to tell her. She looked at me surprised and said, "That's where the original staircase was before we renovated." A chill ran down my spine. The electrician came a few days later, but he found nothing wrong with the lights. The next strange thing happened when Sarah's parents came over. Her father kept hearing the gate unlatch and footsteps approaching the back door, but no one ever knocked. It happened so often that it became almost normal. But none of us ever felt scared, just curious. Months passed, and one day, my great-nephew, now 2, started talking about his imaginary friend more often. He called him my guy. One afternoon, while Sarah was walking him down the steep loft stairs, he suddenly stopped and said, "Mom, wait for my guy." Sarah smiled, thinking it was just a typical imaginary friend. But then she asked, "What does your guy look like?" Without hesitation, he said, "He's not little. He's a man." The room went cold. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, and when she told me about it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was too real, too strange to ignore. But we didn't want to overreact, so we kept it to ourselves. Another time, while visiting a friend, her son stopped on the stairs and said the same thing. Wait for my guy. What do you think happened next? Have you ever encountered something, or someone, like this? It started as a joke, but there was something about my niece's words that chilled me to the bone. Is he coming with us? She asked, glancing over at her son. He turned around, his gaze drifting toward an empty space in the room. After a moment, he spoke softly, his voice as innocent as could be. He says he can't. He's never been there before. My niece chuckled nervously, unsure of what to make of her 2-year-old's statement, but it sent a shiver down my spine. You don't expect a child so young to talk like that, especially when they haven't been taught about such things. It felt off. According to folklore, ghosts can't visit places they've never been in life. It's an old superstition, but one that sticks with you. But what really unsettled me was what happened a year later when her son was almost 3. Out of nowhere, one evening, he looked up at her and said, "Mom, this isn't your house." She laughed, trying to calm him. "Of course it is. Mommy bought it, remember?" But he just shook his head, his little face as serious as could be. "No, it's not," he insisted, his eyes darkening with something unspoken. "He says it's his house, and it always will be." That was the moment it really sank in. My niece wasn't fazed, brushing it off, but for me, it felt like a weight had dropped in the room. Over time, her son stopped mentioning "my guy," as he called him, and life seemed to go back to normal. But one night, when I was babysitting, I experienced something of my own. It was well past midnight, and I was watching TV, the house quiet as my nephew slept soundly in his room. Then I heard it. The sound of the gate latch being pulled, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the back door. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the quiet house. I assumed my niece had forgotten her keys and was back early, so I went to answer. But when I opened the door, no one was there. I stepped outside, looking around, but nothing. Just as I turned to go back inside, 3 softer knocks followed. I froze, standing still. It felt like something, or someone, was out there, but I refused to go further. "No," I said firmly, though I didn't know why. "I'm not going there with you." The knocking stopped for a moment, and I thought it was over. But then 3 faint knocks sounded, softer this time, like a whisper. I stayed inside, refusing to acknowledge them. The house was silent for the rest of the night. The next day, my niece shared the history of the house. Before the renovation, an older woman had lived there with her 2 grown children. Her daughter, just in her 20s, had taken her own life, but it happened at the hospital. A year later, her son, almost 30, was killed in a car accident. The grieving mother eventually sold the house, and it passed through several owners before my niece bought it. More recently, a tenant had rented the basement suite. A 30-year-old man, found dead in his kitchen. Police said it was a natural death, but they couldn't explain why. My niece had always had trouble keeping the basement suite rented out, and while she never felt the need to leave, the strange occurrences, things that couldn't be explained, kept her on edge. Then my father passed away in July after a long battle with cancer. He had been undergoing treatment since January 2013, but by April, the doctors gave him just 6 months to live. In May, he slipped and fell on a wet doorstep while trying to get our Yorkie mix outside. He was in pain, but he refused an ambulance for hours. Eventually, we got him to the hospital, where we learned he had fractured his hip. Sadly, he never left the hospital. In July, cancer took him from us, but after his funeral, strange things began happening. My father had always called home between 8 and 9 p.m. during his hospital stay, and the caller ID would always show private caller. A few nights after the funeral, the phone rang during the same time frame. The ID came up as private caller again. I picked up, and there was no one on the other end, just a dial tone. It felt strange, but we didn't know what to make of it. Then, at a charity event in my father's memory, we released balloons. Yellow for survivors, red for those we lost. The red balloon, the one I had meant for my dad, kept hitting my mom on the head over and over again. She'd move, but it followed her. It wasn't until it was time to let the balloons go that it stopped. It felt strange, almost like my dad was playing around, just like he used to when we were kids. 2 days ago, the phone rang again during the same time. Private caller. No one on the other end. And my mom, when driving my car, has had trouble with the back door. It keeps popping open for no reason. My dad always preferred sitting in the back seat. He said it was more comfortable. This too felt connected somehow. And our dogs, our Yorkie barks at things we can't see, but it's our Labrador German Shepherd, usually so quiet, who's been barking at nothing too. Her happy bark, the one she uses when she's excited to see someone she loves. I'm typing this now, and I still feel a chill run down my spine. I can't shake the feeling that something is here with us. Underscore 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 underscore. I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. Underscore 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 underscore. I grew up in a very religious household, so much so that it bordered on being overbearing. We were the type of family to hand out tracts in parking lots and talk endlessly about the rapture. Anything that wasn't from God, it had to be from Satan. Even Santa Claus? Yep, we convinced ourselves he was just another form of Satan. We'd rearrange the letters in his name to prove it. At 14, I was sent to a strict church school. I graduated, though not without plenty of trouble. I was often punished for what was considered rebellion, which mostly meant reading anything outside the curriculum. To give you an idea of the mindset I had back then, I truly believed what I was told. I wanted to believe that Santa wasn't really evil, but deep down, I was too afraid to question it. At 14, things started to change. Right when I entered church school, weird things began happening. The stress from school, combined with what was going on at home, created a perfect storm. One night, I started to feel it, a presence behind me, breathing heavily. And that's when I realized it wasn't just a presence. It was a poltergeist, and I hated it. It's a tale I could tell another time, but for now, let's just say it was beyond terrifying. Ever since then, I started having trouble sleeping. Every night, I could feel something in the corner of my room, yet it was never visible. Maybe it was just stress, but the fear crept in deep. I'd spend my nights praying, reading my Bible under the dim light of a flashlight, my eyes always scanning that dark corner, waiting for something, anything, to happen. My parents worked long hours, so when they dropped me off and head out, I'd be home alone. I used to look forward to that solitude. It was my time to relax, read, hike, or chat with my best friend. But one afternoon, while getting ready for a hike, I saw strange balls of light dancing down the hallway. They were bright yellow and orange, about the size of a nickel. At first, I thought it was just dust, but they floated too far down the hall for dust to catch the light. They were too big too, otherworldly. They appeared in the darkest corner, where no light should have reached. Instinctively, I knew this was something more sinister, something demonic. Without thinking, I grabbed my cat, Mav, and jumped out of the window to avoid walking through the hallway. Those balls of light came back every night. It became so regular that I'd just jump out the window to avoid them. Finally, after days of sleepless nights, I found the courage to talk to my mom about what I was experiencing. She dismissed it, telling me it was all in my head. "You just need to pray more," she said, her voice steady but cold. When I asked one of my teachers, she gave me a strange look and told me, "You either need to find God or get your head checked." My best friend, always supportive, just cried and handed me my Bible, urging me to pray. I stopped seeking help. but I did manage to hang a thick curtain across the doorway to my room. It wasn't a real door, but it blocked the sight of the light balls. On nights when my dad wasn't home, I'd curl up on the couch with Mav. My mom would sit in her chair, her back turned to the hallway. One night while I lay there, I felt a strange chill. Then Mav started growling. This was odd. Mav, a calm and friendly cat, never growled or hissed. He was usually a ball of affection, but now he was on alert. His growls deepened, his fur standing on end, his ears flattened back. He climbed onto my chest, as if shielding me from something we couldn't see. Mom asked what was in the hall, but I couldn't see anything. Mav's growls grew louder, almost frantic. He stayed on top of me, crouched and trembling. Eventually, whatever it was left, and Mav calmed down. From that point on, things didn't feel the same. Every time I sat in the living room, Mav would growl at the hallway. We still couldn't see anything, but my mom would mutter, "It's like he's trying to protect you." By then, I knew I was dealing with a poltergeist, those cursed light balls, something in my room at night, and a strange, unseen presence in the hallway that set Mav off. I prayed. I read my Bible, but nothing seemed to help. At least my mom was starting to get weirded out, so I didn't feel as crazy anymore. When I turned 16, things took an even darker turn. Until then, I wasn't sure what I thought of ghosts. I tried to avoid the subject altogether, but then I found myself haunted by a Confederate soldier. Great. After high school, at the age of 18, the poltergeist activity stopped, but the strange occurrences didn't end. I started working at a local Walmart, and one day, I met someone who would change everything. She was sensitive to things most people couldn't see. Out of nowhere, she asked, "Who's the soldier following you around?" I was stunned. She described him perfectly. The Confederate soldier. She said there were other spirits too, spirits drawn to me, because I had a strong life force that made me an easy target for them. I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. I wasn't crazy after all. As the years went on, I accepted that ghosts were real. I got used to the strange occurrences, and I stopped panicking every time something happened. It became normal, even if it was unsettling. Looking back now, I realize I might have turned a bad situation into a nightmare by letting my fear control me. The light balls, they were harmless, just energy. The poltergeist, it wasn't as bad as I thought. The presence in the hallway, once I stopped being afraid, it seemed to lose its power. The thing in my room at night, it was probably just my imagination. Now, I don't think of myself as religious in the way I used to. I found a path that doesn't revolve around fear, and most of the time, I try to figure out what's happening rather than panic. Sure, sometimes I still wonder, what was that? But instead of spiraling into fear, I search for answers. More often than not, I can find a logical explanation for what I saw. Now, my family, my husband, and my toddler are stationed at Fort Hood. We've been living in this house for a little over 2 years. Both my son and I have experienced strange things here. I say I assume my son has, since he was only 7 months old when we moved in, and he can't tell me what he's feeling. But he often reacts in ways that suggest he notices things too. What do you think happens when you're the one stuck trying to explain things you can't see? 4-0 Mini. At first, it started as an unsettling feeling, like I was being watched. It wasn't threatening, just a creeping discomfort that hung in the air, especially when I would go to the bathroom. There was this presence behind me, almost as if something malevolent was just over my shoulder. My son, even as a baby, would fixate on one spot in the bedroom ceiling and the stairwell, staring at them for long stretches. It felt odd, like he was seeing something that I couldn't. Then, about a year ago, I began hearing things, mostly footsteps. Now, considering this duplex was built back in the 40s, I assumed it was the thin walls. But then I started hearing the footsteps even when the neighbors weren't home. These weren't regular footsteps, though. They sounded like heavy military boots. If you've ever heard someone marching in boots, you'll know it's a distinct, deliberate sound. One evening in April, when my husband was away for training, I was sitting on the couch, watching TV, when I clearly heard someone walking between me and the TV. I couldn't see anyone, but the unmistakable sound of boots scraping against the floor echoed through the room. It wasn't from the TV show I was watching, and the neighbors were out of town, so it couldn't have been them. A day or two later, my son was napping upstairs, and I was quietly working on my computer when I heard something truly bizarre. It was a mix of bird calls, rushing water, and loud whispers, all coming from the stairwell. I was completely freaked out, especially since my son, at not even 18 months old, didn't have any toys that could make that noise. I called my dad, who's had his own fair share of weird experiences, hoping he'd have some logical explanation. He couldn't make sense of it either, but he suggested it might be the water heater, even though it was on the other side of the house. It didn't seem likely, but it was the best he could offer. When my husband came back, I told him about it, but he brushed it off as nothing more than my imagination. After that, things settled a bit. The only thing that still continued was that lingering sensation of being watched whenever I went to the bathroom. But now, my son started doing something even stranger. He would sit in the corner of a room, playing by himself, and talking in different voices. He'd randomly point at things that weren't there. Some people suggested he might be showing signs of autism, given that he preferred to isolate himself and didn't play much with other kids. But I felt like he was still too young for any diagnosis. What really got me, though, was when he told me he was playing with a friend. At 2.5, he was too young to be imagining things like that, especially since there weren't any other kids around. I've heard stories about the houses near Fort Hood being haunted, which isn't too surprising considering the military base nearby. But I wasn't sure I was ready to share my house with whatever might be lingering in the shadows. Growing up, I had to share space with a lot of things I couldn't explain, but as an adult, all I wanted was a place that felt truly mine. So I decided to try talking to whatever might be in the house, telling it that this was my space now. It seemed to quiet the noises, but not entirely. It was unsettling, but I didn't get an evil vibe from it, just a strange one, as though something was trying to get my attention. We live in Salado, Texas, a small town nestled along the historic Chisholm Trail. The town's creek runs through the area, with evidence of ancient Native American tribes, like the Paleo Indians and the Talacome. Salado is also home to the historic Stagecoach Inn, once known as the Shady Villa Hotel. It's the longest-running hotel in Texas, dating back to the Civil War, and has hosted figures like Sam Houston and Robert E. Lee. Though I haven't dug deep into any deaths associated with the place, Salado certainly has its eerie side. Our first strange experience happened in House No. 1, where we lived from April to September 2012. My in-laws, my husband, our toddler, and I were all packed into a 3-bedroom house about 40 or 50 yards from the creek. The last woman who lived there had passed away in the house, though I'm not sure how. At first, I didn't think much of it, but about 2 weeks after we moved in, my mother-in-law woke up screaming, "In Jesus' name, leave me." She later described a dream where she saw the old woman who had lived there, standing in her room and seeming to shield her from something darker. My mother-in-law didn't give much detail, but it was clear that it had terrified her. In May, I found out I was pregnant, and that's when things really started to get weird. I began hearing knocking on the bedroom wall, coming from my brother-in-law's room, tapping sounds on the kitchen counter, and that same unnerving sensation of being watched. I chalked it up to pregnancy hormones messing with my nerves, but things only escalated. By June, my brother-in-law had gone away to stay with friends for a few weeks. He had been withdrawn for a while, holed up in his room most days. When he left, my husband and I took the opportunity to sleep in his room, since it was cooler than ours, which faced the morning sun. That's when things took a bizarre turn. In that room, the knocking started again, sometimes every 15 minutes. We began seeing things, shadows moving when there was no one else around. Needless to say, we quickly moved back to our own room, but by then, it was clear that something was very wrong. In the months that followed, the strange events never seemed to stop. Every time we stepped outside for a smoke, we heard loud bangs coming from a metal table in the yard, a constant tapping on the walls and counters, the sensation of invisible fingers brushing against my hair, and the unsettling sound of footsteps in the tall grass. It was as if the house was alive with restless energy, and that was just the beginning. Tension hung in the air, too. My husband's parents were constantly at odds with us, arguments brewing over everything and nothing. It felt as if the house itself was feeding on the anger, amplifying it. One night, as we played a game of hide and seek in the darkened house, I saw my husband crawl from his brother's room toward the bathroom. Laughing, I called out, "Found you." But then, to my horror, I heard his voice behind me in the bedroom, calling my name. We were alone, just the two of us in the house. No one else was there, yet the room felt as if it was spinning. The air became thick, suffocating. That night, I couldn't sleep. Later, when my brother-in-law returned in late July, we shared the unsettling events with my husband's parents. They attempted to cleanse the house, praying in each room, making the sign of the cross on the walls with holy oil. But instead of calming the atmosphere, the events escalated. Days later, we woke to find all the doors wide open, and the kitchen cabinets were hanging by frayed hinges, their wood curling and peeling as if something had been clawing at them. It wasn't until a month before we moved that something happened that made us decide we couldn't stay any longer. One night, I found my husband standing outside in the yard, staring up at the sky. He didn't respond when I called out to him, so I left him there, thinking he just needed some space. When I returned about an hour and a half later, I touched his shoulder to get his attention. He collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. He couldn't explain why he had been outside, or what had come over him. For the next month, he would often go outside at night, sitting in the grass or by the side of the road, drawing disturbing pictures with black ink. When I asked him where these images came from, he simply said he didn't know. It was as if his mind was elsewhere, somewhere dark and twisted. We moved that September, hoping for peace, but that peace was short-lived. In late July 2013, we traveled to Mississippi, leaving my brother-in-law behind to keep an eye on the house. The second night after our return, I woke to the sound of snickering in the hallway. The next night, I heard the door to my brother-in-law's room creak open and shut 3 times. Every time I checked, he was still fast asleep. A week later, he stayed with us again. That night, I woke to what sounded like the crackling of flames. I turned over and froze, my breath caught in my throat. In the doorway to my son's room, there was a massive shadow, crouched like a creature waiting to strike. It was at least 2 feet taller than me, and far broader, as if something was taking form out of the very darkness itself. Terrified, I hid under the covers, not knowing what to do. After a long while, I went outside to smoke, hoping for some relief. But even then, the eerie sounds continued. I could hear banging from the yard, though there was nothing in sight that could cause it. The following weeks grew even more unsettling. My brother-in-law began complaining about being watched at night, his sleep interrupted by strange, vivid dreams. He stayed over again, and each night I saw small shadows darting across the walls, moving like they were alive. Outside, we heard unexplained sounds, and 2 nights in a row, my husband and I fought in a way we hadn't since our time at that cursed house. One morning, I woke after a restless night, feeling groggy but awake. As I lay there, I felt something moving on the bed. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I realized something was shifting in the space between where I lay and the edge of the bed. I looked around, but there was nothing to see, so I closed my eyes again, dismissing it as a figment of my tired mind. A few weeks later, it happened again. This time, I felt something move more deliberately on the bed, like a small dog pacing in circles. There were no legs walking, just a mass shifting, as though whatever it was had no real shape, only weight. At first, I tried to ignore it, but it kept happening. Once or twice a week turned into 5 or 6 times. Each time, the presence would crawl up to my head, then down to my feet, as if it was inspecting me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the weight of it on the bed, the comforter shifting in the dim light. What started as a curiosity began to grate on my nerves. One night, I finally yelled out, "Go away," and swatted at the air with my pillow. The presence seemed to leave, but the next night, something in the house moved. I keep a jar of multicolored antacids in my nightstand, and one day, a pink one fell to the floor. I couldn't find it, and assumed it had rolled under the nightstand. The next day, when I came home from work, I found the pink antacid balanced carefully on one of the wooden rods in my closet. I knew it hadn't been there before, and no one had entered the house. It was both creepy and strangely, almost like a peace offering, as if whatever it was trying to be funny. That night, when I went to bed, I woke up to find a cushion from another room resting on top of me. The fan in the room had also been turned on, though I was sure it had been off when I went to sleep. As unsettling as it all was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was toying with me, like an unseen force, silently pushing me toward the edge of my sanity. I started to feel the oppressive weight of something, like an unseen presence pressing down on the mattress next to me. It wasn't just the usual poking or brushing against my skin. This time, it felt heavier, like it was actually trying to make contact. I could hear the faint rustling of fabric, like a whisper, but there was no one there. It was the kind of silence that suffocates you, a quiet so thick you can feel it in your bones. And then came the cold. It wasn't the typical chill that fills a room when the windows are left open during a crisp night. No, this was something different. A biting cold that sank deep into my skin, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. By late August, the strange occurrences had become routine. I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, even when I tried to shake it off. It was like living with a shadow I couldn't shake. Every night, without fail, it would return, leaning against my bed, causing the mattress to sink beneath its weight. The subtle pressure was unmistakable, a constant reminder that it was there, hovering just out of sight. The sensation of coldness crept up the length of the bed, always inching closer to me. The bed, once a place of comfort, had become a trap. Every night, I felt it move, its unseen weight shifting as it glided from one end of the bed to the other. First, it would settle at my feet, then climb slowly, crawling its way up toward my chest, its presence as heavy as the darkness that filled the room. I couldn't understand it. There was no malice, no immediate threat, but the relentless touch, the pressure on my limbs, the strange feeling of being touched, was becoming unbearable. The air around me always felt thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting. One night, in sheer frustration, I yelled, "Leave me alone," but it didn't respond, didn't stop. The silence that followed only grew heavier. At that moment, I saw it. It wasn't a full figure, more like a distorted mass, gray and wavy, constantly flickering like the dying light of an old street lamp. If I stared directly at it, it seemed to dissipate, disappearing into the shadows. But in the corner of my vision, it was always there. A faint silhouette, like smoke that never quite fully formed. I could sense nothing evil, nothing to suggest malevolence, but the sensation of desperation was unmistakable, like it needed me, needed my attention. My friend Rachel, who had always been open-minded about the paranormal, suggested that I stop acknowledging it. Just ignore it, she said. Eventually, it'll get bored and leave. Desperate for some peace, I decided to give it a try. That first night was the hardest. As soon as I climbed into bed, I felt the familiar bump. My legs were poked, and the coldness spread across my body. The sensation of something brushing against my limbs, the soft pressure on my feet, it all returned, just as I had grown accustomed to. But then, something changed. This time, it didn't just stay at the edge of the bed. It inched closer. I could feel the sensation of something intangible, something unseen, shifting through the air. And then, it came to rest near my face. I could feel it, its presence, not physically, but in the way the air seemed to ripple around it, distorting everything near it. Its energy wasn't cold, but electric, like static building up in the air. It pressed against me, and I felt its touch, a soft, almost gentle sensation. Its fingers, or something like them, wrapped around my forearms. I could feel its feet brush against mine, as though it were trying to make some sort of contact. And then, the strangest thing happened. I felt it again, this time more intense than before. In the blink of an eye, it pulled itself completely inside me. It was as if my mind expanded suddenly, and my body froze, like waking up from a deep sleep, but unable to move. It was that strange, in-between feeling of being both calm and alarmed, as if you were in a trance, but fully aware of everything around you. This soon became a nightly routine. Every evening when I settled into bed, I'd feel it creeping up. It would take about 5 minutes for it to settle in, its presence adapting to my body like a thick, sticky fog that wrapped around me. It was odd, almost like an invisible force that conformed to my every movement, like an amoeba that shifts and changes. If I moved a hand or leg, it would adjust with me, stretching to match my movements. At times, if the fan was running, it struggled against the current of air, like it was still figuring out how to exist in the atmosphere around me. But once it aligned, I would slip into that mind-awake, body-numb state again. It wasn't sleep paralysis, but more like being stuck in a deep, lucid dream. And it didn't like me to turn over in my sleep. If I tried, I would feel its grip on my forearm, a strange, icy hold that felt too strong for something that wasn't truly there. It felt like a warning, like it didn't want me to move. When I woke, there was always that tingling sensation, like electric shocks coursing through my body, and I knew that it had left for now. It wasn't possession, not exactly. I was still fully in control, but its presence was unmistakable. I've got muscular dystrophy, and when it's inside me, the constant, gnawing pain just vanishes. No more pain meds needed. I'm not sure if that's its intention, but it's an effect of its presence. It's not healing me, but it sure feels like it. I don't feel like it's draining my energy either. And my dreams, well, those haven't changed, but it doesn't feel like a lost loved one, like a relative who's passed on. And to be honest, I'm not even sure it was ever human. It's just there. I try to laugh it off when I can. Once, when I felt it approach, I joked, "With you around, every day's like Halloween, huh?" Another time, after it settled in, I heard the creaking of a rafter somewhere in the distance and said, "Did you hear that?" "I think the house is haunted. What do you think?" I could almost swear I felt it chuckle, if that's even possible. One night, I asked it in my mind to stroke my left cheek, and after a few minutes, I felt this soft, electric sensation, like tiny currents of energy dancing across my skin. It was subtle, but unlike anything I'd ever felt before. Curious, I asked it to do the same on my right cheek. It took a while, but after some time, I felt the exact same sensation. I started using my cheeks as a way to communicate with it. Left cheek for yes, right cheek for no, and my forehead for I don't know. It touched my lips once, but never my forehead. And even when I've tried asking it questions, I only get delayed answers, like when I'm at work and suddenly my right cheek tingles, but by the time I remember the question, it's too late. I'm left wondering, still unsure of its purpose, still questioning why it won't leave me alone. I never invited it in, and it seems to have no regard for my personal space. If I don't let it in, it gets aggressive. I can't even sleep without it there. If I try, it just pokes at me, taps me in the night, never leaving me in peace. I've tried moving to different rooms, but it follows me. The only time it leaves me alone is when I'm awake, like when I'm reading in bed. Then it's like it just disappears into the shadows. Some nights I almost look forward to its presence, but most nights I just want it to go away. I'm getting used to it, I suppose. I can sleep with it inside me now, even if my mind races with questions, wondering if I'll ever truly understand why it's here. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When my grandfather passed away when I was 14, after a long battle with cancer, it was a bittersweet moment. Part of me felt relief, knowing he was no longer suffering, but the rest of me was devastated. I had grown up with him, and losing him felt like losing a part of my own history. When Grandpa remarried, I wasn't thrilled with his new wife. She never wanted me to call her Grandma, and I could tell she didn't feel much affection for Grandpa's children or grandchildren. This tension becomes significant for what happened during his funeral. My family, my parents, younger brother, and I drove the 3 hours to the funeral home. We were all surprised to learn that there wouldn't be a proper service, just a viewing. Grandpa had been a rancher all his life, and our family had deep roots in the heart of Texas, with a long history tied to the land. We had lived there since it was part of the old Spanish territories, and Grandpa was well known and loved by his neighbors. It just didn't make sense that there wouldn't be a service, or at the very least, a wake to honor him. When we arrived, a funeral home employee led us to the room where Grandpa's body was being kept. The room was calm, but we were confused to find that his widow wasn't there. There were no flowers either, except the ones we brought with us. It was heartbreaking to see Grandpa all alone in that room. Feeling the emptiness of it all, we decided to hold our own little service. My dad took the lead, and we all took turns standing by the casket, placing mementos, saying prayers, and reading verses from the Bible. As my dad spoke about what he loved about his father and the regrets he had, the lamp beside the casket began to flicker. At first, we didn't think much of it. It could have been a loose bulb. But then, when my mom shared her favorite memories of Grandpa, the lamp flickered again. We exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if we were all thinking the same thing. When it was my turn to speak, I found it hard to get the words out. Grandpa and I had been so close, almost like best friends. I told the story of when I was 12, homesick at a friend's house in Houston. Grandpa had dropped everything and made the drive all the way to pick me up and bring me back to Dallas, just to make sure I was okay. As I spoke, the lamp began flickering wildly, like it was trying to get our attention. My mom even stood up to try to turn it off, but no matter how many times she fiddled with the switch, the lamp refused to stop flickering. After a while, she gave up, and the lamp eventually stopped on its own. Then my brother spoke, and once again the lamp flickered. At this point, my dad chuckled softly and said, "I think that's Grandpa, telling us he's glad we're here." We all nodded in agreement. After our makeshift service, we waited, thinking Grandpa's widow might show up. But after an hour of waiting, she still hadn't arrived, so we decided to leave. It was strange that, once we'd made the decision to leave, the lamp didn't flicker again. Now, years later, as a 19-year-old, I still think about that day. It was one of the first moments I truly felt like Grandpa was still around. I've had paranormal experiences ever since I was little, some that still haunt me to this day. I was about 2 years old when I first had an encounter. My mom always tells me the story of how I woke up from a nap and waddled into the living room. When she asked me how I'd slept, I told her it was fine, except for the part where my Grandma Jo had woken me up to tell me she loved me. My mom was shocked because Grandma Jo had passed away when my mom was only 21, a full 12 years before I was born. I didn't remember her, but I was adamant that she had come to visit me. That was just the beginning of the strange things that happened to me. But one of the most vivid experiences happened when I was around 11. My family had just moved into a small house in Lubbock, Texas, and the place felt different. There were strange smells that didn't make sense, like cookies baking when there was a roast in the oven. We even smelled cigar smoke when no one smoked. And there were occasional door slams that would come out of nowhere. But the one experience that stands out, the one that has haunted me for years, happened one night when I was sleeping on the living room floor on one of those big bean bags. It was late, and I had moved from the floor to the couch, too tired to go to my room. I lay there, staring at the hallway behind me. As I started to close my eyes, I heard a deep, gruff cough, a man's cough, but not like my dad's. I turned my head quickly, but the room was pitch dark. At first, I thought it was my dad getting up, so I tried to settle back into the couch. But just as I was about to drift back to sleep, I heard it. Heavy footsteps pacing back and forth in the hallway, slow and deliberate. I was wide awake now, and the sound was unmistakable. It sounded like whoever was walking was wearing heavy boots. I leaned back against the couch to get a better look, and that's when the hallway light suddenly flicked on. For a moment, I saw a shadow stretching across the floor. It looked like a man, but the figure was much larger than my dad. My heart began to pound as I quickly stood up, unsure whether I should rush into the hallway to confront whatever it was. But before I could move a muscle, the light snapped off, and the footsteps faded away just as quickly as the shadow had appeared. Right then, my parents' bedroom door creaked open, and my dad stumbled out, still half asleep. He looked over at me, concerned, and asked if I was okay. I couldn't find the right words, so I just nodded, too shaken to explain what I just witnessed. Later that night, I told my mom about what had happened. She sighed and said she had a similar experience one afternoon when she was napping on the couch. She explained how she had been lying with her back to the hallway when she woke up suddenly for no apparent reason. When she turned toward the hallway, she saw a dark figure standing by her bedroom door. Frozen, she stared at it for what seemed like forever, unsure what to do. Then she found herself speaking aloud, asking, "Could you please leave? You're keeping me awake." The figure slowly faded and vanished. That was the first time either of us encountered the presence in our house. We moved out soon after, but those memories never left us. Over the years, my dog, Maisie, has always slept beside me, her presence a small comfort. Every night, we follow a simple routine. I slip into bed, and she climbs up, snuggling close to me. We have our little ritual. I pet her and whisper softly. Then I turn off the lights and read stories on my Android until I feel sleepy. But one night, as I finished reading and was about to drift off, Maisie suddenly jerked awake. She leaped to her feet, standing beside me on the bed. The room was pitch dark, as always, so I couldn't see what was bothering her. I assumed maybe she had a bad dream. Gently, I reached out and stroked her neck, coaxing her back down. She settled down, but just a few minutes later, the same thing happened again. This time, I reached over and flicked on the lamp. Maisie was still standing beside me, her head lowered and her tail tucked, as if she were confused. I figured maybe she had been disturbed somehow, so I got her to lie down once more. We both settled in, and I turned off the lights again. But just as I started to fall asleep, Maisie shot up once more. Frustrated, I turned the light back on, sat up in bed, and said aloud, "I don't know who you are, but leave my dog alone. If you don't, you're going to have to leave." I stayed awake for a few minutes, my eyes scanning the room, making sure whatever it was got the message. After a while, I turned the lights off, and for the rest of the night, we slept in peace. The following nights were calm, but on the third night, when I turned off the lights again, it happened once more. Without hesitation, I flicked the light back on, sat up, and repeated, "I told you to leave my dog alone." After that, Maisie settled down, and we finally slept through the night. But then I started noticing something odd. Maisie would climb into bed with me as usual, but the moment I stopped reading on my Android, she'd wake up from a deep sleep and crawl down to the trundle bed. She'd stay there the rest of the night. No matter how much I coaxed her to stay with me, she'd slip down to the trundle whenever I let go of her. I was disappointed at first, but eventually got used to it. That was about a year ago. Recently, though, I noticed Maisie had started sleeping back in bed with me again, and I was relieved. It felt like things were returning to normal. But a few days ago, something strange happened. When we were getting ready for bed, I patted the covers for her to jump up, but she wouldn't come. I called her gently, but she just stood a few feet from the bed, whining softly and staring at me. This was unlike her. I turned off the lights and lay down, but she stayed there, still whining. I turned the lights back on, and in a quiet voice, I spoke to her, trying to comfort her. Gently, I took her collar and led her to the bed. She crawled up, but immediately went to the foot of the bed, lying down but continuing to nervously glance toward the head of the bed. In the summer of 1993, I set off on what I thought would be a simple vacation to a small town in New England, but little did I know it would become an experience that would forever change the course of my life. What began as a typical getaway quickly turned into an unforgettable journey, one that intertwined with the mysterious energy of the past. A deep, unspoken connection between the living and the dead, a bond that defied the boundaries of time. I found myself in the quiet village of Hawthorne Ridge, a place brimming with both beauty and a hidden history, the kind of town where every cobblestone seemed to whisper a tale. Hawthorne Ridge had seen its share of hardships, having been a stronghold for the Catholic community during the turbulent years of religious persecution in early America. The town had been shaped by its defiance against the cruel laws of the time, a testament to the enduring spirit of faith. At the heart of this community stood the Hawthorne family, who had long been intertwined with the history of the town. Their ancestral home, a sprawling mansion with towering spires and shadowy hallways, had been passed down through generations and held the rich secrets of their Catholic heritage. During our visit, we had the rare privilege of being given a private tour by none other than the current head of the Hawthorne family. As he led us through the halls of the mansion, recounting the stories of his ancestors and the portraits that lined the walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that something greater than history itself was lingering in the air. The Duke's devotion to his faith and the charity work of his late wife, who had helped the less fortunate of the town, left a lasting impression. But this was only the beginning. As we left the mansion, we noticed the imposing silhouette of a church standing nearby. It was the town's first Catholic church, consecrated after the Catholic Emancipation Act of 1829. I could feel the weight of the place as we walked along the side of the church, an eerie sensation as though someone was walking right behind me, their presence so close I could almost feel their breath on my neck. I turned, expecting to see someone, but the street was empty. At that moment, I brushed it off, but it lingered in the back of my mind. Inside the church, I was taken aback by the beauty and quiet solemnity. It was here that I learned of a distant relative of the Hawthorne family, a nobleman who had been canonized as a saint for his steadfast defense of the Catholic faith. His grave was here, marking not just a physical burial, but the weight of centuries of spiritual struggle. When it came time to leave, most of the group, eager to head home, got into their cars. However, my close friend, Una, her young daughter, and I decided to stay behind and explore the town a little longer. We wandered down one of Hawthorne Ridge's charming streets, the sun casting a golden glow on the weathered buildings. Muna pointed out an antique store we had passed earlier, and something drew me toward it. Inside, nestled in the back corner, was a wooden statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, priced at only $1. I knew right then I had to take it home. After stopping for coffee, we returned to the store. As I held the Madonna statue, my eyes were drawn to a set of delicate pink rosary beads that seemed to call to me. The store's owners, an elderly couple with gentle smiles, let me handle the beads. I couldn't help but ask about their origin. The woman smiled knowingly and gestured to the back of the store. There, resting in an old frame, was a black and white photo of a couple, the man in a dark suit, the woman in a flowing dress, both from the 1920s. A certificate beside it revealed the man's name to be Benjamin Reed, the date marked 1919. Curiosity piqued. I asked if I could purchase the photograph. The couple refused. They insisted that I take it as a gift. The woman explained that Benjamin Reed was her brother, but she never revealed her own name. In their hands, they gave me a prayer book from 1879, a cherished possession of Benjamin's mother, Ada Payne. She had been a quiet figure in their family's story, but through these items, I felt her presence, as if she was reaching out from the past. Along with the prayer book, they handed me a certificate detailing Benjamin's life, another small but significant piece of history. Despite my insistence on paying, the elderly couple would not accept any money for these precious artifacts. They told me that these were not items to be bought or sold, but rather pieces of a past that needed to be passed on, a legacy too important to be tainted by money. When I left the shop, I felt an unsettling calmness envelop me. The items I had received felt far heavier than their weight in my hands. The subtle presence of those who had once lived and died in Hawthorne Ridge seemed to follow me, leaving me with more questions than answers. And as I walked back toward the car, I couldn't help but wonder, had I truly left the past behind, or had it followed me home? As I stepped out of the small antique shop, clutching my newly acquired treasures, an overwhelming sadness washed over me. I had her prayer book, the certificate of her brother, the faded photograph, and the rosary, but I still didn't know her name. The items felt heavy in my hands, like echoes of a life long gone. The weight of them felt almost sacred, but I needed to know more. I turned and hurried back inside, asking the owners if they could help me uncover the identity of the woman in the picture. They dug through their records and finally found it. Her name was Eleanor Rose. The date in the prayer book was 1922. The couple explained that Eleanor and her brother had never married, and a chill ran down my spine as everything clicked into place. I now knew her name. I was holding onto the remnants of her life, her most cherished possessions, some might say, handed down from beyond the veil. When I got home, I shared the entire experience with my mother. As I spoke, I began to realize something strange. I knew who had been walking beside me that day at the church. It had been Eleanor. She had guided me to that shop to make sure the pieces of her life found someone who would respect them, someone like me. From that day on, I've kept her memory alive, saying prayers for her and her family and keeping her treasures close. But the story didn't end there. A few days after my eye surgery, I had a dream that felt more like a message. I stood at the doorway of my bedroom, looking into the darkened hallway. There, in front of an old family portrait of the Virgin Mary, stood Eleanor, but not as the woman in the photo. She appeared as a child, no older than 11, glowing softly in the dim light, her presence peaceful and gentle. She smiled at me, her eyes full of a knowing kindness, and explained that she had come to me in this form because she knew I would not be frightened by a little girl. In that dream, Eleanor spoke to me softly, asking me to pray for 2 young boys who had drowned in a local creek. I promised her I would, and when I woke, a deep sense of purpose filled me, as though I had been chosen for something greater. I knew now that my connection with Eleanor was not just some random encounter. It was a calling. Since then, I've kept my promise. I pray for Eleanor's family, and I pray for the 2 boys from the dream. The rosary beads I purchased are now used in those prayers, and every time I hold them, I feel a profound sense of gratitude, grateful for the chance to be part of her story, and in a way, to keep her memory alive. Months later, I reached out to the antique shop again. I spoke to Jenny, the owner, and learned more about Eleanor's life. She had passed away earlier that year, in 1995, at the age of 92. Eleanor had lived alone in a modest apartment near the beach in Santa Monica. Jenny told me that Eleanor had been battling illness during her final months, weighed down by the grief of losing her mother. Perhaps, Jenny said, it was this grief that had kept Eleanor from ever marrying. I made my way to Eleanor's old apartment, still vacant after her passing. The place had a large window that looked out onto the ocean, and I couldn't help but wonder if she had witnessed the drowning accident from there. The memory of it, perhaps, still haunting her in her final days. When I returned to the antique store to pick up the last of Eleanor's belongings, white leather gloves, a 1959 prayer book, the same year I was born, and pieces of delicate jewelry, I felt a sense of closure. It was clear to me now that these items were meant for me. They were part of a story that had found its way to me, and I treasured them deeply. I may never fully understand why this strange and wonderful journey happened to me, but I do know this: it has deepened my faith and reaffirmed my belief in something beyond this life. Through this experience, I've come to understand that we are all part of a much bigger family, a family that spans both time and space. And perhaps, just perhaps, Eleanor and her family were meant to be part of mine, in some way, for generations to come. This is the tale of a night in the small, quiet town of Pine Lake, nestled in the heart of rural Michigan. A night that still haunts me, a night that lingers in my mind like a living nightmare. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It's something I witnessed firsthand. and it still feels as real as it did back then. It all began with the wedding of my good friend, Mike's sister, Emily. They lived just next door to me, and we were more than neighbors. We were family. The house where the groom's family was set to stay that night for the wedding celebration was known as the Wicked House. It had been abandoned for over 15 years, and though no one had lived there for ages, passing by it always gave you the eerie sensation that someone, or something, was watching you from behind the broken windows. I was just a kid at the time, no older than 9 or 10. The wedding, as is tradition, was scheduled for the evening, lasting well into the early hours of the morning. Mike's father had rented the house for the groom's family to stay overnight. The Wicked House was a towering, 3-story structure, old and weathered, with paint peeling from its walls. The once bright red paint now looked dull and lifeless, and the house had an imposing presence that seemed to hold secrets in every corner. One evening, I was asked to go up to the second-floor balcony of the Wicked House to fetch some desserts that had been left there for the groom's side of the family. What I saw when I stepped onto that balcony, I still can't quite explain. As I walked out, I froze in place. Sitting on the low wall of the balcony was a woman, dressed in a long white gown, her hair flowing down around her shoulders in waves. She sat perfectly still, her gaze locked on me with eyes that were the deepest, most unsettling shade of red. It was the eyes that caught me first, so vivid and intense. They felt like they were staring into my soul. And then, a sound that still chills me to this day. A harsh, shrill laugh broke the silence, cutting through the air like a knife. She spoke to me, her voice a strange mix of calmness and hysteria. "What do you want? Why have you come here?" And then, as if switching moods, her tone turned mournful, almost childlike. "Go back," she pleaded. "I will not leave anyone. Go back. Leave this place." I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, her words echoing in my mind like a broken record, getting louder with each passing second. Suddenly, without warning, I turned and ran. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached my mother, breathless and trembling, as I tried to tell her what I had just seen. When we returned to the balcony moments later, the woman was gone. Just like that, vanished. We searched the house, but there was no sign of her anywhere. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the terror I felt in that moment still lingers. Not long after, the celebration took a tragic turn. There were screams coming from downstairs. The groom, who had been in the bathroom fixing a light bulb, had been fatally shocked by an electric current. He was found lying motionless on the cold bathroom floor. Word spread like wildfire, and the wedding came to a sudden and heartbreaking halt. The marriage was canceled, and the guests rushed to leave the house, shaken and fearful. Whispers began to spread through the crowd. Something was wrong with the Wicked House, something dark and cursed. Later that night, my grandmother shared an old tale with us about the house. She told us that many years ago a man had lived there with a woman, not his wife. One night, the woman disappeared without a trace, and the man was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The rumors in town had it that the man had murdered the woman in cold blood, and her vengeful spirit had been haunting the house ever since. The story went that her spirit would never allow anyone to stay in the house for long, especially not during a celebration or ceremony. Anyone who dared to stay would be cursed, and tragedy would follow them. The groom, it seemed, was the latest victim of her wrath. After that night, the Wicked House was left to decay. Its broken windows, shattered doors, and eerie silence were a constant reminder of the dark history it held. To this day, no one dares to go near it, and the name Wicked House has become synonymous with misfortune and death. The spirit of the wronged woman is said to still linger there, a silent watcher for anyone who dares to step too close. I still remember that night, the red eyes, the strange laughter, and the feeling of pure dread that washed over me. Even now, years later, that memory is as clear as ever, and I can still hear her voice in my head. What do you think happened next? Could the house truly be cursed, or was it something even darker at play? I was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened. It was during a visit to my Aunt Mary's house, a place I've been to so many times since I was little, probably around the age of 4. For the longest time, I never felt anything unusual about the house, even though it always had a bit of a strange, unsettling vibe, especially when you were alone. It never crossed my mind that the house might be hiding something darker beneath its old walls. Aunt Mary's house sat on a hill on the outskirts of town, far from the neighboring homes. It was surrounded by thick woods that made the house feel even more isolated. It was almost like the house lived in its own little world, separate from everything else. One summer afternoon, she was hosting a party. As usual, the men were out on the porch, laughing and enjoying the music a bit too loud. Some of the women were inside, sitting around the kitchen, chatting. I, on the other hand, was left to wander around, trying to find something to do. At one point, I felt a pressure in my stomach. Nothing alarming, just the familiar urge to find the bathroom. So I entered the house through the front door, which creaked slightly as it opened. The bathroom was just a few steps inside, immediately to the left, and the kitchen was on the right. I walked in, shut the door behind me, and began unbuttoning my overalls, feeling the coolness of the air in the room. Then, something happened that I can't quite explain, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just the typical sensation that someone was near. This felt different, as if someone was right there in the room, staring at me. I froze, and that's when I saw it. Right in front of me as I stood facing the shower, a hand appeared. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then, the hand moved slowly, cautiously, pulling back the shower curtain. It wasn't fast, more like it wasn't sure what it was doing. I could feel the coldness radiating from it, something unnatural, something that didn't belong. I was paralyzed. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My body felt as though it were frozen in place, and all I could do was watch in horror as the hand slowly parted the curtain, revealing nothing but empty space behind it. It wasn't like the hand was searching for something. It was almost as if it was just waiting. Finally, after what seemed like forever, I found enough courage to move. I dashed out of the bathroom, my heart racing. I didn't want to tell anyone, especially not my mom, who was in the kitchen with Aunt Mary. I didn't want them to think I was just trying to get attention or being dramatic. So when I walked back into the kitchen, I said, "Mom, there's a ton of flies in the bathroom." It was a weak excuse, but it was all I could think of at the time. Despite the fear gnawing at me, I decided to go back and check the bathroom. When I opened the curtain, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I stood there staring at the empty space behind the shower curtain, wondering if I had just imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. A little later, I told my dad what happened, but he didn't believe me. He chalked it up to me probably just imagining things, and he tried to come up with a logical explanation. My mom, though, wasn't as quick to dismiss it. She told Aunt Mary about the incident, and her reaction wasn't surprise. It was more like quiet understanding. Aunt Mary told my mom that I wasn't the first one in the family to experience something strange in that house. Over the years, several family members had seen things. A finger pressed to their lips as if to hush them. Footsteps that sounded like boots crushing gravel. A man standing at the foot of an uncle's bed. And even a figure outside another uncle's third-floor window. It was said that 3 men had died in the house. One on the top floor, another in the basement, and the third, well, no one really knew where, but his presence was unmistakable. After my experience, the house was blessed, and I've never been back since. Sometimes, I wonder if the house still holds onto that same energy, that same eerie feeling, or if it's just the memory of the place that lingers with me. I've never shared this with anyone before. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I ever would, but the events I'm about to tell you have stayed with me for years. I was just a kid, about 6 or 7, when I had a dream that felt so real it's like it happened yesterday. It began with a teenage guy, someone who looked a lot like me, walking down a long, quiet hallway in a house I didn't recognize. The air was still, almost too still. It felt suffocating. As he walked, a strange sensation of being watched settled over him, like something was lurking just out of sight. At the end of the hallway, he saw her, a woman. Her face was hidden in shadows, but her presence was unsettling, unnatural. As soon as he noticed her, he tried to turn and run, but he tripped, falling hard onto the floor. His ankle twisted beneath him, pain shooting up his leg. He couldn't escape. The dream didn't stop there. It came again, every month or so, always with the same scene. Sometimes I would wake up in a cold sweat, wondering what had scared me more, the dream itself or the deep sense of helplessness it left me with. It was like I was somehow tied to it. The dream always ended the same way, with the man falling, hurt, unable to move, stuck in a nightmare he couldn't escape. A few years later, my family moved to a new house, an old place on a quiet street in Houston. It was a beautiful house, but there was something about it that didn't sit right. It was big, with long hallways and rooms that sometimes felt too empty. At first, I thought it was just me adjusting to the change, but after a few days, that feeling of being watched started creeping in. You know the feeling, right? When you're alone, but you can't shake the sense that someone's with you. It happened a lot, especially in the hallway, the same hallway from my dreams. That was the first clue. One afternoon, after school, I felt drained, completely wiped out. I thought I'd just take a quick nap. But as I walked down the hall toward my room, something made me stop dead in my tracks. There, at the end of the hallway, standing by the window, was the same woman I'd seen in my dreams. Her eyes were dark, almost piercing. Her presence was overwhelming, like the air around her had thickened. I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest. It felt like she was waiting for me to do something, but I didn't know what. Fear gripped me. I turned and ran, not looking back until I was standing outside, my breath ragged, chest tight. Later that evening, my friend Kyle came over. We were kicking a soccer ball around in the backyard when he suddenly froze and pointed to the window. "Hey, who's that woman in the window?" I turned to look, and there she was again, standing in the same spot, staring at us through the window. Before I could say anything, I tripped and fell hard, twisting my ankle just like the guy in my dream. I couldn't shake the feeling that these two things were connected. It was as though the dream had somehow bled into reality, a nightmare becoming tangible, and I was stuck in the middle. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The woman, the hallway, the fall. Something about it felt so wrong. I'd had strange dreams before, but this one felt different, like it was a warning. One of the most vivid ones I had was set in a parking lot near the Houston Astros Stadium. A car pulled up, and a man stepped out. But before he could move, another car pulled up and blocked him in. A dark figure emerged from that car, and in an instant, the man was shot. It didn't make sense at first, but the more I thought about it, the more familiar the scene became. The woman from the hallway was there too, sitting in the passenger seat of the car. It was like I was watching a moment from my own life unfold, except I wasn't there. The man in the dream looked so much like me. I began to wonder if these dreams were showing me my future, or maybe even someone else's fate. I kept the dream about the shooting to myself. I didn't want to scare anyone, especially with everything that had already been happening. But just a few weeks later, something even stranger occurred. I had a dream about a car crash, right in front of my house. A woman was screaming, "David, oh my God, David." When I woke up, the feeling of dread wouldn't leave me. A few days later, I learned that a guy named David Green, who lived just a few houses down, had been in a terrible car accident. He didn't survive. I've always been able to see things that others can't. Ghosts, spirits, whatever you want to call them, they've followed me from every house I've ever lived in. But lately, things have gotten worse in this new house. It's like I'm always being watched, even when I'm alone. The only place I feel somewhat safe is the bathroom. Thank God. I've been here for about 5 months now, and it hasn't gotten any better. Strange things happen all the time. I'll turn on a cold tap, walk away for a second, and when I come back, the hot water's running instead. Or sometimes I'll start a tap, and it just shuts off by itself. It's like someone's playing tricks on me. Let me give you a little tour of the house. When you first walk in, there's a pair of glass doors on the right that lead into the living room. Further down the hall, you have the kitchen. On the left side, there's the computer room and my dad's bedroom. If you walk through the kitchen, you'll find a spare room that connects to both the living room and my bedroom. My bedroom's always freezing. No matter how much I crank up the heater, it's like the cold air won't leave. One night, as I was heading to bed, I saw something in the spare room near my door. It was dark, but I could make out the shape of something. Someone. It didn't feel right. I'd seen that figure before, at my old house. It was a ghost, and I knew it meant trouble. I was paralyzed, unable to move, as the figure came closer. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I was frozen in fear. When it reached me, I smelled it. Death. A thick, suffocating scent. And then, I heard it. Breathing. Soft, like a whisper, followed by murmuring. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the malice behind them. That's when I bolted. I ran straight to my dad's room and woke him up. When I turned around, the figure had stopped, but it felt like the calm before a storm. Things stayed quiet for a few weeks after that, but everything changed when I hurt my leg and had to stay home from work. I've been stuck here for about 3 weeks now, and at night, as I try to sleep, I hear things. It's like there's a party going on somewhere far off, voices laughing and talking, but when I get up to check, nothing's there. I've checked the TV and radio, everything's off, but those voices keep going, like they're echoing through the walls. My dog, Damo, has been acting strange too. He'll start barking at my bedroom door for no reason or running in circles around the house, making it feel like something's chasing him. It's not like him at all. One night, it was just me and Damo. My dad wasn't home. I was in the computer room when I heard a door creak open. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured someone was just moving around, but when I went to leave the room, the door wouldn't open. I pulled, I pushed, but it wouldn't budge. The air around me grew icy cold. Then I heard a door slam somewhere outside the room. Panic began to set in. I tried to open the window, but it was stuck, hadn't been opened since last winter. I tried the door again, and that's when I heard a faint voice. It said, "Welcome home." The blinds started to move on their own. That's when I scrambled under the table, closed my eyes, and just waited, hoping it would stop. I didn't tell my dad the next day. I knew he'd just think I was being dramatic. But the next morning, things got worse. My dad freaked out when he saw his guitar. Every single string had been sliced clean off, and his room was a mess. I didn't do it, and Damo sure didn't. How could a dog cut guitar strings? But somehow, I was the one who got the blame. A few days later, my grandmother came to pick me up. She walked in, sat down, and then, just 5 seconds later, she stood up and dragged me with her. She said, "There's a man in the house. He has bad intentions, and there's also a little girl with him." I didn't doubt her for a second. My grandmother has always been able to sense these things, and she was right. After that, I started sleeping with the light on. But 2 nights ago, everything changed. My dad told me to turn the light off because it was costing too much, so I did. I laid there in the dark, trying to get some sleep, but then my bed started shaking. It felt like an earthquake, the whole bed trembling for about 15 seconds. Then suddenly, I was yanked off the bed and slammed into the wall. The bed kept shaking, and I could hardly breathe. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt like it was meant to hurt me. The ghost was back, the man and the little girl. The girl was crying, looking at me like she was sorry for what was happening. The man knelt beside me and whispered, "Welcome's over," or something like that. And just like that, he vanished. But the girl stayed. I know she's not dangerous. I've seen her my whole life. I was scared, But somehow, I felt comforted too. I knew she would keep an eye on me. I know all of this sounds unbelievable, but it's happening. And it's getting worse. The more I see, the more dangerous it feels. People say you stop seeing things like this as you get older. But for me, it seems to be the opposite. Now, I even see things at my friends' houses.